Got that? Chris, if you're ready, and Sean, if you're ready, we'll get going.
I'm ready.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:02. And we have Chris as our minute taker, so we're all set. If there's any public comment at this time, if you raise your hand, I'll scroll through the list. Dave, you have a public comment?
I do. I'm putting my grandpa hat on with this break in the weather and having half of our vaccines, first half in our skin. I have the wonderful opportunity to help walk our grandchildren from Bristol Elementary to their home on Maple Street, and it's delightful. And I get to see her and have her interact, our granddaughter interact with some of her friends and parents and grandparents and staff members. It's a wonderful experience. And people are willing to share thoughts with me because they now know that I'm on the school board. And what I heard today as a grandpa, really bothered me. It's my worst fears of Act 46. And that is that we have seen a reduction in staff with regard to losing pupils, but we've also seen an increase in administration and the control that administration is exerting over staff members. So we have some highly trained professional staff members, master's degrees. My feeling is that we should let them do their job. And if they're not doing their job, we should remove them and find staff people who can do their job, rather than having a myriad of administrative people oversee their work, tell them when they can and can't do things. And so this bothers me greatly. The promise of Act 46 was reduced administration and better able to save our small community schools. And what we're seeing in our district is the opposite of that. And that concerns me greatly. Thank you.
I just want to remind people to turn off or to mute yourself. There's a mic open and we keep hearing some conversation. Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. All right. So our next item is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Could I pull something from that, Dawn?
What would you like to pull?
Just that Stacy Carter is leaving the district.
So you'd like to pull D?
Yes.
Is there a second?
I think I saw Sandy wave her hand.
Oh, okay, Sandy. Are we still muted? I don't know if you're saying. Just second?
Sorry, I'll second it. Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay. Kristen?
Yeah, I just want to say Stacy's an amazing teacher, and I want to thank her for her 11 years in the district. She's amazing.
All right. Okay. All right. Herb, did you miss public comment?
Yes.
Okay. If you can just let us finish the consent agenda, I'll give you a minute as soon as we finish the consent.
Okay, thanks. Digitally inept.
No worries. We can help you out when we get done with the consent agenda. Okay. All right. Is there any further discussion about that item? All right. So we're okay to put it back in, Kristen? Oh, Dave?
So are we discussing whether to remove a piece from the consent agenda, or are we discussing the consent agenda itself?
You're right. We missed the vote. So there was a motion and a second. I'm assuming because we already talked about it, everybody's fine with removing it. If you're not fine, speak up and I will note so. Okay. All right. Okay. Dave, did you have something you wanted to add about that item being pulled? You're muted. You're muted.
I want to talk about the rest of the consent agenda when the motion's made to approve that.
So if it's made to approve the consent agenda, all is one, we're not going to discuss it. We're just going to move it and vote.
Okay, so my question about the consent agenda is, are all the signatures required in order to do the payments? I forget exactly what it's
The pay
called.
orders?
Yes, the pay orders.
I think it's a majority.
Good. I won't sign it again until we have a finance committee.
Okay. All right, so if there's no more question about the item that was pulled, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda with all the items A through D. Is there a motion?
Moved, Krista.
Krista?
I'll second Andrew.
Andrew, thank you. All right, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Okay. That passed. Our next item is to accept the
Those opposed?
Sorry, those opposed?
Aye. Nay.
Any other opposed? I did. All right, and Herb missed public comment, so we're going to give him a minute.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I just wanted to comment, I share Dave's perspective and observations about, the promise of Act 46, to which he was a huge, well-intentioned supporter around administrative costs. I just add that the other promise had to do with equity around outcomes between different districts. And so I would throw that in there too as something that we still need to achieve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Herb.
Point of order. Do we have since we pulled something out of the consent agenda, do we have to act on that as well?
No, because if you don't otherwise take another form of action, it goes back in, and that's why I said A through D, so they were all back in.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. Moving on along, so under executive limitations monitoring, to accept the monitoring report for 2.7 compensation and benefits.
So moved, Andrew.
Andrew, thank you.
I'll second it.
Sarah LaPerle.
Sarah, yep.
Thank you. Discussion. Rob?
You hear me? Sorry. I've had issues with this computer recently. Thank you. I guess I have a question in regards to the policy, and part of this is obviously outside of our district's hands, but in thinking about compensation that puts the district in financial jeopardy, I feel like that's $1 million question that we're trying to address with this facilities planning process. And I guess with the district, with health insurance premiums, 10 to 15% sort of year over year of recent, and I guess 9% maybe this coming year forecasted, that's a good thing. I guess I don't know how do we address that? I mean, it's part of our ends, and yet we're in this limbo because financially we bump up to the threshold, or we're projected to scream past it here year over year as we move forward. I just feel tension there. I don't know if I have a question, but it's just an observation I have. I don't have any problem with the report, but
I think just as a matter of clarification, this is a little different than our ends. This is our executive limitations, and these are the shall nots that we give that we sort of give the fence around what the superintendent cannot do or can do once we've delegated him certain authorities. So the ends really are the goals for our education system, and these are sort of what guide the superintendent's work, just for clarity. I don't know, Patrick, if there's something you want to say about your report, or?
No, not so much about the report. I think to Rob's point, just sort of so cost containment is kind of the takeaway that I had from Rob's point. And I think, yeah, compensation and benefits are the driving cost for the district. And those that have been involved in the negotiations process, several people here have done multiple rounds of that. It's a pretty intense process. It's a very collaborative process. And I think our compensation and benefits are competitive with the region. They're not the highest and they're not the lowest. To your point, I think, yes, a strategy to control costs could be to negotiate smaller increases or potentially even reductions in compensation and benefits. There are challenges in doing that. I think not the least of which are the challenges at the negotiations table. But also, I don't know that it necessarily serves the district well in the long run to be the least paid, least compensated kind of district. I don't think that serves us well to drawing the sort of top quality candidates that we want to draw. So it is a delicate balance. My belief has always been I'd rather have fewer people that are well compensated, that bring a level of quality that we want to draw, rather than more people that perhaps couldn't get a job somewhere else that pays more but took this job. I think we want high caliber people. I think we have a great compensation package, and I think that's the right way to go despite financial challenges.
Rob?
By no means was I advocating for less compensation. I just feel like it's tricky when the health insurance piece, which is a very, fluid piece, but costly to the district, is sort of outside of your, or when we go to the negotiating table. And I guess it's frustrating sitting back here and having to sort of, I can imagine being in your shoes and Floyd's shoes, just waiting to see what that number is and trying to anticipate. And it just puts our district and districts around the state in just such a tough spot, unfairly, in my opinion.
Kristen?
So Rob, having been on negotiations for many years, the amount of time we used to spend negotiating healthcare was 20 hours, 40 hours per district. And we didn't get any different outcome than what they've been getting, really. So if you, it might have been more than 40 hours. It was horrible. So if you take that many hours and multiply that by how many districts there are, the amount of human sitting in a chair listening to stuff, if you've got, at some points we would have, between teachers and us, 30 or 40 people sitting there. It was probably the most useless waste of time of my life. So, and the outcomes aren't that much different from the state than what we would have gotten. So I actually support that. And we were hoping that eventually the state would be able to control costs, which they haven't yet. But there have been some changes in healthcare even in the last 56 days. So let's see where it goes. And as I said, I think that the state taking that piece is actually a benefit, especially in the amount of time that hundreds or thousands of people are sitting in chairs doing that every time that a district has to renegotiate.
Any other questions or comments on the monitoring report? Okay. I'll let you give me a thumbs up on this one. Based on the information provided, does the board find that the superintendent's interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no? Based on the information provided, does the board find that the data demonstrates the accomplishment of this interpretation? Okay. All right. Based on that, all those in favor of accepting the monitoring report 2.7 compensation and benefits, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I have an abstention.
Sandy, you're abstaining?
I
You
am.
want that noted? Do you want your name noted or just one abstention?
No, one abstention is fine.
All right, so that passed. Okay, the next action is to accept the monitoring report for 2.8 communication and support to the board.
So moved, Krista.
Krista, is there a second?
I'll second. Sarah.
Sarah, thank you. Any discussion? Dave?
So I think that the superintendent has not, let's see if I can call this document up again in front of my face. Says the superintendent shall not permit the board to be uninformed or unsupported in its work. So I don't think the superintendent has not permitted. I don't know. I don't want to make this a double negative. He's done his job. The superintendent has. Nevertheless, I feel uninformed, and I hate getting my information on the street, which I do, and emails and phone calls. I think the board needs. Let me speak for myself, maybe everybody else on the board feels well informed. I need better information about how our schools are working, whether the kids are being successful, whether the teachers are feeling supported, and whether things are going well, whether the climate in our schools is good. I need more information about that. I don't think the superintendent has inhibited that information. I just think the board has not done its job in becoming more well-informed.
Krista?
Yeah, maybe it's it's similar, I think, to what Dave was saying, and kind of related to our process. I think we have, mentioned this before, and I understand it's a lot of times a time issue, but we get significant information and then we don't always have time to reflect back on that information after it's presented once to us at that meeting. And so, for example, the per pupil spending presentation and the financial spreadsheet we saw last week, both really important pieces of information for our overall conversation. And we're not making a practice to revisit those. And so I think, like with the survey results, we introduced those originally. We got some great feedback on how to better present the data. And then we brought that back to the board, which invited more conversation if that was of interest to people. But I'd like us to find a way to embed in this policy something around making sure we have ample opportunity to discuss the information, especially when it's relevant to significant decisions that we're going to be making in the future. And the other thing I was thinking about is the board questions. And again, I don't think this is any fault of Patrick per se. I think we're just recognizing that there's so much information coming out so quickly, and it's all, pretty important. And so I think so I would say that, we need to do better there in how we provide time for those conversations and that digestion of that information. And I don't feel as informed as I would like to be, because we haven't had that built in.
Rob?
Yeah, I'll definitely second both Dave and Krista in those sentiments. I have felt, and granted, I know this facilities planning process is ongoing, and we're still in the process of, asking questions, receiving data and stuff like that. But throughout since December, I definitely don't feel like I've feel that informed. And I agree with Krista. I wish we'd have more time to just sort of to talk and have conversations and discussions about stuff. And I think, that would really help. And I think there's still a lot of big questions out there that need to be addressed. And then I think if we can get responses to those and discuss them as a board, I feel like I'd feel much more informed. But yeah, I just haven't thus far, and maybe it's a factor of being a new board member too. I'm still feel like getting up to speed, but there's definitely been times where having to ask questions 30 seconds after you're presented with sort of an overwhelming amount of information, that wouldn't be good practice in the classroom. So I don't think it's good practice for us as a board. So that's where I'm at.
Okay. Anyone else? Sandy?
Thank you, Don. Patrick, do you have any suggestions on how, how we could improve that process? I know policy governance is interesting in the interpretation, and there's a lot to do. You have a lot to do. I'm sure you're very busy. But it is the same concerns I'm hearing from David and Krista and from Rob are still ones that I remember from when I was on the board before. I think it's just the challenge sometimes of doing a board governance. And, I worked with you when we were trying to interpret a lot of these provisions, doing policy governance work when we were trying to do that. And I think it is always, it's difficult, but I don't know if you have any thoughts of maybe the ways that we as board members could connect better and maybe get information that isn't always just necessarily in the format of the board meeting.
Yeah, I agree, it's tricky, and some of it's about, it can be about roles, perspectives. I think about the irony is not lost on me that in our third or fourth meeting this month, we're talking about not having enough time to talk about things as a board. I think that's indicative of the work that we're engaged in right now, that it's really complex, and we could meet 5 times a week and not talk about everything that we wish we had time to talk about. So I think that's where, for me, clarity on what it is we want to talk about and invest the time, because time is finite. We've tried to make time less finite this month, and we're still wishing we had more of it. And I think recognizing means and ends and trying to stay focused on the ends may help provide sufficient time to talk about ends. I think if the interest shifts more toward wanting to know more depth about means, we will never have enough time because the depths are so great. So I feel like there's some room there for conversation, and I think clarity. I still, this conversation has come up around the ends conversation, like a lot of general topics of I wish I had more information coming from individual board members or as a board, but no clarity on what information. Like, so the question process has been helpful, and sorting through what questions does the board as a whole have for me so that I can be responsive to those. That's helping. But I think more general statements about wishing for more information doesn't put me in a position to help provide that, or even help process with Don and thinking about ends and means and helping to navigate the policy governance realm. So that's sort of off the top of my head where my thinking goes. but I agree it's tricky, especially when we're in more controversial topics of conversation. I think what we want to avoid, and we have history of this pre-consolidation, are probably board meetings where we're talking about where to put the dumpsters at Mount Abe, right? Like that level of means conversations has historically existed. And as a unified board, looking over 6 schools and 1,300 students, those are conversations that can take hours, that don't change outcomes for students really, and don't necessarily focus the organization toward its ends. So trying to find that line between understanding the organization and knowing how it's operating, how it's doing, more toward the ends versus the digging into the means. And I feel like that's always the hard part with 2.8, right? I don't feel like it's appropriate as superintendent for me to lead the board into the weeds of the means, because I'm then sort of doing the opposite of supporting the board and adhering to its policy governance model. So I try to stay more ends focused and stay higher level in terms of how the organization's operating, and then respond to the more specific questions that sometimes surface and other times are not surfacing in a really specific way.
Krista, was that your hand again?
Yeah, thanks. I had a comment and a question. I think, I hear what you're saying, Patrick. I think what's challenging about the work we're doing right now is that it is future focused and or strategic thinking related. And so, I spent some time looking at the toolkits that we had gotten in the mail some time ago. But one of them talks about the information you need for ends decisions. And I feel like a lot of the information you've provided so far has been related to those decisions, those kind of taking an environmental scan of where we want to be and where we are now. And I think that, the problem for me is just not having enough time to really process that adequately. And maybe that's my comment. My question is it for the board to determine how better to structure our time so that we make sure when, I'm even imagining something as simple as we get some really great presentations or data from you, and at the end of the meeting, kind of a check-in, do we want to put this on a future agenda to discuss again, or do we, just so that we know. And I appreciate that we don't want to do that for everything, because we will never move forward. But some of these things seem really pertinent to understanding the bigger picture of where we're headed. So that's why I'm kind of struggling here.
Dave?
So I completely agree that it's a waste of time to talk about where to put the dumpster. However, I think that the other extreme is also not good for our children. And that is, when I was coaching middle school basketball at Mount Abe, I questioned the notion of myself trying to coach 22 young men and having to divide those kids into equally talented groups of 11, and have them alternately trucked as far away as North Country to face teams that had gym space that Mount Abe doesn't have, that have cut programs so that they only have their most talented kids in the junior high program. I said, that this, I understand the value of involving as many kids as you can in sports, but I just don't think it's realistic when you have the kind of program we have in middle school. And the athletic director said to me, he said, that's a board decision that this is the way the program's going to run, that we're going to have a non-cut program and we're going to engage in scholastic competition with schools who have cut programs in middle school gyms. So we got clobbered 54-10 in the basketball games. And I didn't feel that the morale and the growth of the boys was well served. But it was a board decision. And I lived with it, and I tried to do the best I could with the challenge that I had before me. But it turns out the board's never talked about the sports program at Mount Abe since I've been on it, whether, what kind of program we want. Now, maybe that's too much in the weeds for this board. Maybe that's too close to where the dumpster goes to talk about the philosophy of whether we're going to have a no-cut program or a cut program, depending on the kinds of facilities we have. Maybe that's too much in the weeds for the board. On the other hand, I think not having a finance committee and looking at the budget of the central office, I think bosses, big bosses, CEOs across all genre are pretty good at controlling the costs of the organization below their level. Not so good at controlling the costs at their own level. That's the board's responsibility. We are responsible for the superintendent and his office. And we ought to be looking at the budget for the central office in our finance committee as a part of our overseeing the superintendent. That's clear to me. Whether we talk about sports policy or not, I don't know. That's a judgment we have to make. But the notion that policy governance prevents us from talking about anything with regard to the programs that our kids are going to be involved in seems to me as foolishness and not serving our communities in the best possible way. Thank you.
Any other comments on the monitoring report 2.8, communication and support to the board? And Kevin, I do have your worksheets to attach. Thank you for filling them out. Okay. Not seeing anyone else. Based on the information provided, does the board find that the superintendent's interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no? Okay, seeing yeses. Does the data demonstrate the accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes or no? Okay. Okay, mostly yeses, 2 no's, but mostly yeses. Okay.
I'm abstaining, Dawn, just
Okay.
because it's.
Yeah, this is just for the response form. So this is the vote. So all those in favor of accepting the monitoring report for 2.8, communication and support to the board, please give me a thumbs up. Five up, okay. Any opposed? 3 opposed. Any abstentions? So the motion carries 5-3-1. All right, thank you.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Where does that feedback go that we talked about in terms of improving? I mean, is it the case that if the whole board isn't feeling like that's an issue, then that's not an issue that we'll pursue?
So I included it on the response as comments, and my thought is that if we're going to talk about this, we ought to look at, I think a lion's share of this is the board's issue, that they should be looking into it themselves. So if there is any discussion to be had, it should be about by us about how we're handling our meetings and what we can do to improve our work. I would start there. Did that answer your question?
And so, yes, and that makes sense. And I'm wondering where that goes or when that.
So I'm going to have to look through the policy and see if it comes with an existing monitoring report, if it would fit in somewhere.
Okay.
If it does, then we could discuss it with that one, if it happens to be one coming up. But if not, then I would put it on to discuss under board management, to discuss the policy and get a little deeper into it so that we can all have a sort of group understanding that's a little deeper about it.
Sounds good.
To improve our process.
Thank you.
Okay. And Sandy, your hand?
No, I just didn't know if it was something. I saw that board communication was still on the agenda for today, and I don't know if that's where it might go, but I can defer if it sounds like it'd be better somewhere else.
Yeah, I think if I can just look through the policies and see where I think it might fit, and see if it's already something we can act on coming up. But I really think it's the lion's share of the work is us on improving that. Okay. Then the next item is an update on the financial report that was included. Oh, Kristen, did you have something about
Sorry,
that?
yeah, I mean, I'm rarely at a meeting at work where there isn't some sort of timekeeping happening. So just that idea. And when we talk about it, that I think we should look at that as at least a parameter.
Okay. All right. Okay. Update financial report. It was included in your packet. Does anyone have any questions? Patrick, anything you need? Oh, Steve has his hand up.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find it quickly enough here, but what I was just sort of scanning down through this and picked out a couple of items. For starter, the fund balance you've got highlighted, that's your current forecast, with probably still quite a bit of stuff to be encumbered.
If you look at the notes, it kind of gives us of what the higher expectation for encumbrance is. We think because of some reimbursements we've seen from COVID, we're probably going to finish the year with we're going towards the end of the year with a fund balance that's maybe not quite 1.9 million, but it is anticipated to be north of 1 million at this point, and that will probably be used to some degree with some of the capital projects that we have on the docket.
Okay. There are a couple of salary items that I was just curious about. One is 1100-103 substitutes. Looks like it's $130,000 in the red.
And that may just be because it's being hit to the district as opposed to spread to the individual schools where it's budgeted.
I might be able to speak to that a little bit too. So we have a couple of folks that are on unpaid leaves this year. And so we've hired substitutes for pretty much the full year for them. And so that would show as a decrease in the salaries, but would show as substitute costs perhaps on that substitute line. That may put that figure way over what would be expected. That could be a contributing factor.
Yeah, I figured it was either something to do with that or another COVID fallout. And then there was another one similar to that under support services, 2200. Maybe they're related. Professional stipends is almost $200,000 in the red.
I can speak to that if you need me to, Patrick.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, so I think that is related to our, we had an SLP that left the district in January. And so we attempted to fill that position unsuccessfully. So we had to contract with a contracted provider. And I'm assuming that's what that's referencing. Is that play out correctly, Floyd.
Could. But that number is pretty big. I'm going to spend a little more time on that, Steve, and get back to you.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that was it.
All right, Rob?
This is, I guess, a bigger picture question, but is our district going to see any of the money that's flowing in from the federal government? I had heard that Burlington School District is getting a boost of close to $14 million. So you going to see any of that?
Yeah, I have some of those figures here. I was going to add that to this update. So we just recently completed so there's a few different pots of money. First was the CRF, Coronavirus Relief Fund. That sort of goes back all the way to the beginning and recognizing the various expenses surrounding that. So we've received about $450,000 to date to help cover some of those expenses. Going forward, there's ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 funds that are in different stages of development right now. ESSER 1, we've completed the application and the application has been accepted. So that's sort of furthest along of the ESSER pots of money. For that amount, for that ESSER 1, we're receiving $317,620, in part to cover some expenses dating back, but also as we begin to anticipate need going forward, as we kind of shift into recovery planning, as districts around the state are doing. And then the dollars get bigger from here, but we have less clarity on what's allowable spending. So the question really is going to come into what strings are attached, and how does that influence our ability to spend the money. So I'll talk about the dollars, then I'll talk about some of the thinking behind the dollars at this point. So ESSER 2, we expect to receive or be able to apply for just north of $1.2 million. That application we think is due in November. Is that right, Floyd? So we have some time to be thinking about that. Then ESSER 3, which is still in its infancy, we're anticipating upwards of $2.9 million. So these are all total, the CRF, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, we're projecting in the neighborhood of 4.9 million, maybe just under 4.9 million. And again, the bulk of that is yet to come. Lots of questions about what's allowable or not allowable. And then some of the concern is like we're prioritizing supporting students with these funds. That's what they're intended for primarily. And we also have to be careful about bringing in an influx of resources that are going to go away, right? That can have a potentially negative impact on a system that we're building. So we've got to be really intentional about how we utilize these funds so that we don't position the organization, or at a disadvantage when these go away. And in the meantime, try to help bring the support and services to our students that they're for sure going to need for some time going forward. There is also some possibility that some facilities improvements can be tied to some of these funds, thinking in particular about HVAC, which is an area that we do have some need in. So those are all the things that we're trying to balance right now as we learn more about what's allowable or not allowable for these different pots of money.
Okay. Krista.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's a big chunk of change, which is great. And I'm just thinking about, again, that forecasting and trend analysis and fitting that into our conversations. And it feels like that's something that would be really good for the board to be, in the loop and sort of what your thinking is and how that investment of money relates to the ends and to this other stuff. So, yeah, I just ask that we be informed in those conversations as much as possible, hearing like what the best thinking is and what the recovery, I know the state is laying out some guidelines for what schools should do around recovery, like some education for us, so we are better aware of how that money is intended to be used and what our thinking is on how it should be used and all of that.
Okay. Kristen?
Patrick and Floyd, is some of that money backfilling money that the district spent back at the beginning of the pandemic? How much of it is backfill? I don't know if you know that exactly. And then I know some children lost more academically due to the remote learning last year, and possibly middle school and high school students that have lost more since the elementary schools are in 5 days a week now. Would some of that money go to help some who are struggling with the only 2 days in school, and remediation for those students?
So I think the money we've been awarded so far, I'll include the ESSER 1 that has been approved. The lion's share of money that's been awarded thus far is really about backfilling. The funds that are yet to come are going to be less about backfilling and more about thinking about our recovery planning and what those needs are. And I think I don't want to make the assumption that all students that are in the hybrid are struggling, but we're not going to necessarily, I wouldn't think, prioritize students because they're in the hybrid. I think we're going to have to think more carefully about how we assess need and where we find that need, which could be academic, it could be social, emotional. Like, we have to also think about how we define need. We would use those metrics then to think about how to strengthen our system during this sort of unprecedented time of need, to help kind of give kids the boost that I think they're going to need in whatever way they might need that, while not disadvantaging us 2 years from now when the money's no longer allowed to be used and it's gone. And frankly, there's a lot of questions statewide. So if MAUSD is 2.9 million just for ESSER 3, I forget exactly how many hundreds of millions it is for the state in ESSER 3. I've heard concern at the state level, given the amount of money and the strings of that are likely to be attached, that it may actually be really difficult for us to be able to spend the money despite the need that we have. So I just want to put that out there, that's a question. That's not a guarantee that even if we wanted to, that we could find ways that would be allowed to spend all of this.
Thank you.
Any other questions around the financial update? Dave? Oh, you're still muted.
I'm trying. Yes, it was good to hear about HVAC. I think that we ought to be ready to, I think we know we have the need, but do we know, what process we want to go through in our buildings? What's that need going to cost? Who's going to do the job? So forth and so on. The more we can understand that when it comes to grant writing time or applying for the funds, that's helpful. I'm hopeful that something like reinforcing the roof and putting solar panels up there can qualify. We'll have to see just how restrictive the money is. But that would be a fantastic improvement to be able to deal with crises, not of COVID, but of weather-related crises in the future with regard to our power. And it's one.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's one-time money. I think you're absolutely right about what we have to be careful not to start long-term programs that are going to cost us, really pump up the per pupil costs in 5 years.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that that concept of solar, I agree that would be a great benefit, and highly unlikely that fits the kind of the litmus test we've been encouraged to use so far is, if not for COVID. And that's where things like that would be quite a stretch to say, if not for COVID, then we would have put solar on the roof. So HVAC, a little different in terms of air quality, health, should, something like COVID ever happen again, to have that kind of improved air quality is a benefit to everyone. And obviously we see the benefits even outside of COVID, common flu and other things like that. So that's where it starts to, and they are watching so far, they are watching the expenditures very carefully. And so that litmus test of, if not for COVID, is one that we take pretty seriously as we look for creative ways sometimes to utilize all these funds, because none of us wants to leave this money on the table given what we know our needs are. And ultimately that may still happen, unfortunately.
All right. All right, the next is the update on the facilities projects.
Yeah, sort of as we're getting closer to the end of the year, we have some facilities projects that we are targeting that kind of range in needs. I just wanted to share with the board some of the ideas that we're thinking about at this point, and working to get some drawings and some cost estimates on, so we can figure out what is feasible to achieve. Starting at Mount Abe, there are sort of three main projects that we're trying to understand more about as we consider what to move forward on. One is a pretty significant upgrade to the Mount Abe lobby. Several of the windows and that front sort of wall of windows at the lobby of Mount Abe are leaking. So we suspect, some are leaking and others are probably waiting to leak soon because they're all the same age. So that's one factor. Something that's been on the list for quite a while has been the security kind of features of that front entrance of Mount Abe. Right now, once you're buzzed in by someone sort of interacting with you over a sort of a speaker and a camera, you have full access to the building, and we hope that you go into the front office and check in and state your business and why you're there and those sorts of things. But more common practice now is to have sort of a secondary approach to that. So creating kind of an airlock entrance. So folks come in from the exterior, they interact at kind of a transaction window with someone where there's a little better view of who the person is, why they're there, what's their body language telling us, those sorts of assessments. And then assuming that transaction goes fine and the person seems safe, then they're buzzed into the office or buzzed into the building from there. So a pretty significant safety upgrade. And that's where the bulk of the cost would be, is to create that sort of airlock. And along the way, we want to continue to look to improve both accessibility, the welcoming environment of that lobby. It's quite dated at this point, pretty dark as you walk in, not necessarily giving out a great sort of welcoming, inviting feel. So looking to make some upgrades to that in general. Really, the lobby and the area as it leads down to the auditorium. So that sort of high traffic area, that's all sort of encompassed in the project that we're looking at. Additionally, really all of the bathrooms at Mount Abe are in need of a lot of work. So we're getting some prices on bathroom renovations so that we have a sense of what it costs per pair of bathrooms, and thinking about gender neutral bathrooms, those sorts of things as we consider bathroom projects. And we are nearly complete with our multi-phase pool project. The pool hadn't really been tended to in a significant way, and perhaps since it was put in there 50 years ago. You might recall we invested pretty heavily in a new filtration system recently, and a lot of other upgrades to sort of the internal portions of the pool. We had it cleaned really thoroughly and it looks great, even though most people can't go use it right now because of COVID. The last part to that is a new, I don't know if apron is the right term, but a new sort of the new system that goes around the perimeter of the pool that the water flows through down into the filtration system. That's in need of really replacement. And once that's done, we feel like the pool is pretty much back to new and is going to be able to be maintained and be safe and everything that we want it to be for years to come. So those are kind of the Mount Abe ideas. Let me walk through. There's some other projects at 3 other schools that we're working to get more information on, and then I'll take any questions you might have. Bristol Elementary School, if you've been there recently, a lot of the concrete at the front entrance is starting to show a lot of wear, and actually the steps that come up from the lower parking lot up to that front walkway are also showing a lot of need. So we're working with architects to, in light of the significant excavation that would be needed to fix that properly, we're working with architects to take advantage of that opportunity, to rethink that entrance and the flow, given current standards and techniques and thoughts. So getting some sketches on what that could or should look like to make that more functional, welcoming, safe. At Robinson, there's a similar need in terms of there's some stairs on the road side of Robinson that are in really terrible repair. And so again, just fixing the stairs properly would be a significant excavation. So again, thinking about the opportunity with a lot of site work that needs to happen anyway to rethink that whole area to make it more accessible and functional and safe and something that can last for years to come. And we're continuing to massage concepts around central office at Beaman and what that would look like so that we can then get some cost estimates. That project wouldn't be anything that would happen obviously this summer, but that is something we're planning to have a 1-year extension on the central office lease to buy us some time to do this design work, to get a plan in place, to get contractors lined up in a timely manner in a way that is, most cost effective. So even though we're looking at a year away from now, we're right where we want to be in terms of that processing. So those are all the things that we're getting, at least all the big things that we're getting more information on, and some drawings and some cost estimates. And happy to elaborate on any of those. Again, knowing that we're still in the getting information phase.
A master swimmer asked me today when they would be able to get back and do adult swim in the morning. Do you have an answer or an estimate on that?
No, we get those questions pretty routinely. Questions around when AAU is going to start. What about master swim? Really general questions about access, like public access to our buildings. Right now, the guidance still says no visitors. So we'll want to pay attention to that. I suspect guidance will change as more vaccinations get out and the weather gets better. However, I also know there's a lot of push to bring kids back full time, thinking about our secondary kids. And I'm not sure that opening the buildings up to public access simultaneously as we look to bring back more secondary students for in-person instruction necessarily go very well together. So I think it continues to be a pretty dynamic situation, and I'd be hard pressed to speak with any certainty about when we'd be able to open that up. I'd like to get them open soon, as long as we can do it safely and it doesn't jeopardize in-person instruction. I just don't know when that's going to be.
Liz?
I thought this might be a good spot to add in what the participatory budgeting on facilities that's going on right now. And Bella is here. Maybe she would have more to share about it. The community council at Mount Abe has students from every grade level, 7 through 12, and they have staff members from all areas and community members like myself. Anyone can join, and as many kids as want. And they have been given $10,000 this year, and they've been doing surveys to students throughout the school and staff and asking what would be most helpful, and they're engaged in a really great process about what they could do to improve the facilities at Mount Abe. And I just wanted to celebrate that.
Bella, do you want to add anything?
Sure. So we sent out a survey to advisories to see what students would like to see be improved at the school facility-wise. And a bunch of responses came back, and we've been whittling down and voting on pieces we wanted to keep, and if we could combine any pieces. We're really looking at outdoor dining and outdoor improvements.
Great, thanks for sharing that.
I've been a part of a couple of those conversations, and I think there's a growing appreciation for how hard it is to figure out how to spend money, and also a recognition of how $10,000 seems like a lot of money until you try to make some improvements on a 175,000 square foot commercial building. So a lot of great lessons learned in this process, and yeah, I appreciate the efforts that the community council are taking on to figure out how best to invest that money. It's great.
Great. Steve.
Patrick, any update on the electrical and roof?
I think there was some need to wait to assess the roof until the weather had improved. So I think we're still waiting to get someone to actually go up there and look at it and see how emergent is that. And yeah, so we're still waiting. And the electrical, maybe Floyd can speak more to that. I'm not sure exactly where the process is right now on the electrical upgrade.
And at this point on the electrical, we haven't pushed that forward. It sits behind the roof. I think we want to get a sense of what that number may be with the roof before we tackle that second problem. Two huge expenses. We'd be pretty terrified of them. But the roof would take precedent, certainly based on condition. So once that condition question has been answered, then it gives us the ability to pivot to electrical as the next project if the consensus is that roof is less of an issue than we think it might be.
Kevin.
So with respect to moving the central office to Beaman and the construction associated with that, is there any thought, or is there any checks as to what the payback would be for that move?
Not yet. That's part of what we're waiting to get. So we needed to do some more work around the concepts and how that would be utilized, how we utilize the space. The architect is also working with some structural engineers around or mechanical engineers around the HVAC system to understand what it has that's good and what it needs as we think about that cost, because that's a pretty significant cost. And then we'll be able to do some cost estimating to get a sense of what that project would be, which would then tell us what the return would be. We're kind of guesstimating at this point that we're looking at probably around a 10-year return.
And then just to comment on the electrical thing, I would feel a whole lot more comfortable as that progresses hearing about some non-destructive testing or on both the transformer and the cables as to the rationale for the urgency of that project.
Okay. Any other facilities, projects, questions? Okay.
So the scary part hasn't come yet, right? Even when I brace myself for the cost for these projects, they come in and they always still blow my mind. So we're getting close to having some costs on these things, but we don't have them yet. So I would encourage you to also brace yourself for what we might expect for costs.
Dave.
I would suspect that some of the electrical could be attributed to HVAC improvements under COVID.
Yeah, we are definitely looking really creatively at COVID dollars and not wanting to leave those on the table when we have such facilities needs. And if there's anything that passes the test that we think we can do that doesn't take away from the more directly academic support realm, because that's going to be priority number one. And we are definitely going to be looking carefully at those. We don't, with the need we have, we don't want to leave dollars on the table. And because of the the long-term benefit to the one-time investment of dollars that you get in facilities projects, there's a great deal of advantage to investing money that way, especially when you factor in a 5 to 7% increase in construction costs. So what we can get done today saves us money down the road.
Andy?
Thanks. Patrick, maybe it's been discussed before, and again, I'm, first month back. Do the other buildings have HVAC concerns, or is it really Mount Abe?
No, the buildings are in different places in terms of their HVAC levels and what their needs are. So for example, Bristol needs some controls. Those controls total probably around $250,000. So even though the actual mechanical part of them isn't great, the controls are antiquated and are in need of replacement. So yeah, every building has some level of need, but they're different in their level of need.
Do you have information on the other buildings, or?
Not with a lot of detail. I know like Mount Abe has many, many individual units, and several of those are very old. I know we're getting the assessment on Beaman pretty specifically to understand more about its system. Floyd may be able to speak more specifically about school by school.
We'll kind of punch through it. Lincoln has a pretty good infrastructure. Again, they don't have great controls. We're looking to be improving those as well. Robinson and Moncton are probably they are our strongest from an HVAC standpoint. And one thing that Patrick didn't talk about, another area that is of concern is the flooring. And the ESSER money also allows for some earmarking for that. So the cleanliness, dust, all of that from a flooring standpoint is another area that we're also looking at across the schools as an opportunity to upgrade some tiles that are 40 years old.
And oftentimes what comes hand in hand with the flooring upgrade is asbestos abatement. There's still a lot of asbestos tile in different schools in the district. So when we upgrade flooring in an area that has asbestos tile, that asbestos gets abated, which is always a good thing to chip away at. It costs a lot more money to put flooring down when you have to abate asbestos first, but it's a good thing to continue chipping away.
And we've talked a lot of high level stuff, but let's talk some low level. We're working on HIPAA backpack vacuum cleaners that are fast, quiet, and allow us to clean without a dust mop and just pushing dirt around while we're sucking it up and using a HIPAA filter. That's a relatively small expense compared to some of these other numbers we're throwing out, but no less important on a daily basis for how those students are able to have good, clean air in the building. So it's top to bottom. Whether it's a $1,400 HIPAA backpack vacuum cleaner that multi-surfaces, or a $25,000 AC unit, or $250,000 for the controls at Bristol, or $300,000 to bring Beaman up to speed. It's big numbers and little numbers.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Moving along, we have a update regarding Nate Levinson and D.
Yeah, so I've stayed in communication with Nate on his support for the board, and based on conversations at the last board meeting, I just inquired with Nate about having him join a board meeting for him to share some of his thinking, some of his experience, and an opportunity for him to hear from you all about what you're looking for and the ways that he can support you. And he has some ideas for sort of calling it a workshop that he would facilitate with the board that would provide that opportunity for you to hear from him and for him to hear from you. And in asking about availability, he is available at the April 13th meeting that is scheduled. So it is possible that that could become sort of a workshop meeting that helps you think about ways in which he can support the work going forward, from metrics for the various options that you're going to be faced with, to process, et cetera, which I think, based on the interest that we heard at the last meeting, that could be tremendously valuable for the work that goes forward in the next coming months. So happy to pull the trigger on that and get it booked and make it official. But I thought it was important to have that conversation here first. I think he'd be a great resource given his experience.
Sarah LaPearl?
I don't know if my memory is serving me correctly, but was this something that Addison Northwest was also looking into doing, or was this not something, because I saw in the paper that they were interested in having a conversation. So I didn't know if they were part of this proposal as well.
They're not currently part of this. And it's a little less clear with Nate and his support than it is with the transportation work. Although I do have a meeting tomorrow morning with Sheila Soul from Addison Northwest, and we can explore this a little bit further to see what level of interest they have, and whether that's something. I feel like they're in a little different place than we are in terms of their situation and the various options they have available to them. So I don't know that them joining this work session necessarily makes sense, but somehow doing some sort of parallel work may be advantageous as we think about the merger study.
Krista?
I think it's a great idea to have them join us. I would really look forward to that opportunity. I don't know if we need to make a motion to make that happen. But I'm also wondering about just revisiting our timeline in general and where that fits in. I was looking for it the other day, and I know we veered off it a little bit, so that might be for our next facilities meeting, like at the top of the agenda, is to refine that. But I'm assuming April 13th, fits still within the timeline we've been working from so far.
Yeah, and my thinking, I agree. I think we have to revisit that timeline just in light of where we are and where we're going. I think after the conversation with Nate, that would be a good idea, because I think that may help shed some light on future direction, which may influence how much time is needed. So I don't know about the top of because I think the next facilities meeting is that April 13th that will be sort of facilitated by Nate. So maybe you were talking about the one after that, which would make some sense.
Now, I was thinking about that one, but that's fine to wait. I don't think we were going to be looking at any proposals before May anyway. Is that right?
Right. I think they're due May 4th.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else?
All right. Can I jump? I didn't raise my hand. Can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
I don't know if it would be helpful. So April 13th, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but like if there's any prep we could do as a board to make really good use of that time, so we should be thinking in advance of what, I don't know, what sort of prep we could do, and maybe we have time to talk about that today or our next meeting. But
and I can ask Nate if he has some ideas of what could be good for the board to do between now and that time.
Okay, Rob.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what Krista said. I mean, I'm in support. Love to chat, and just to set ourselves up so with the limited time we probably would have, least up front, that we make the most of it. Whether it's, an outline of the conversations that you guys have had together, past, I guess a work portfolio of things he thinks, is similar for our district, but just so we utilize that time well.
All right. Patrick, are you feeling like you need a formal action? Would you?
No, I'm hearing support for it, which is kind of what I was reading from the conversations at the last meeting. So I feel like I have what I need to move forward, unless somebody objects strongly to that idea.
So I'm seeing heads nod, so I'm not seeing anybody. Okay. All right. So now we'll move down to board management and governance. And the first item is an action item. I'd like to ask you, it's around board communication structure. And I'd like to ask you to relax for your approval to relax the rules. After our meeting last week where we amended and amended and amended, I'm thinking it might be better to have a conversation first and get some clarity about if there are any changes to be made first, and then take the action after the conversation. Does anybody object to that? Okay. All right. So the topic is board communication structure. And there was the link of the current structure included in the agenda. I do want to say that I did receive a message from a community member that asked that we might reconsider the use of the word short and sweet, and switch that to short, clear, and accurate. I'm looking to find exactly where it is. I know I've read it.
It's under best practices.
Yep. So rather than short and sweet, they wondered if we might consider short, clear, and accurate. So as you frame your discussion, just keep that in mind. Kevin, I know you had some thoughts around this. I can let you go ahead.
Actually, no.
Okay. All right. Then Krista.
I didn't know if it would be helpful to remind people and to let Sandy know a little bit about the context of this document. So when we were working, the community engagement committee had formed, and we were, tackling a lot of different things, but one of them was to try to get more organized around how we shared information out with the community. And our engagement consultant, Sue McCormick, had been working with the Harwood Unified Union School District, and they had developed this framework or process. And so I had a good conversation with the member of their board who created this document, and she was happy to share it with us. So we really didn't do a ton to change it initially, and that's where it was born. And I think there are things that we've employed, like having a communications secretary to streamline communication and get board members more involved. But it's definitely a working document. And so like the feedback from the community member about, that language around, short and sweet, like that's great feedback. I think anything the board feels doesn't best portray what we're doing or what we hope to do is welcome. The one thing that I think would be worth a conversation that I'm interested in having is about the board chair's role in communicating. And I think it's something that came up before. It is referenced in the board chair role, but might also have a place in this document as well.
Okay, Steve?
So two things. One, there's the informal watering hole coffee chats. Has anybody been doing this religiously? Or is it an organized thing, or it sounds like a great idea, but I'm not sure that I've heard anybody actually executing it.
Krista, can you speak to
Yeah,
that?
if I could jump in again, and I think I had a version of this where I had made a couple of editing suggestions, and that was one. That was an idea that was proposed, but I don't think it should be under deliverables because we're not committed to doing that right now. And it is a great idea, and there's lots of really good ideas that we could think about here. But I think for deliverables, it probably could come out because we haven't been doing it.
Dave?
So I think one of the things we ought to do in terms of board communication is we ought to regularly invite people. We talked tonight about inviting the fellow from DMG. The state does a rotating analysis of school districts around the state. I think they may have come to our district a couple of years ago. And it would be good to have someone from that come to us and talk to us about what they found when they visited our school district and what suggestions they have for improvements. I also think, I guess I'm used to having boards invite people that have expertise and bring that expertise to the board and comment on how we're doing things and how we might improve. I had another example in my brain, but it flew the coop, so I won't mention it.
Okay, Kristen.
I think, oh, there we go. I think COVID has totally changed that piece that you were talking about, the watering hole coffee thing, or having town advisory boards or something. I think that was something we were all looking at, and then COVID happened, and none of that can really happen except over Zoom, and people question how that could be as effective in that way. So I think after COVID, it'll be important to do some sort of community interfaces in each town. I haven't even met the new principal at our school because of COVID. So that's just terrible. Maybe I can meet him outside. We're probably all vaccinated now. So anyway, but maybe we can. But I think that's important. And people have asked me and understand, they said, well, it's COVID. So of course we're not going to be meeting in the gym every other month or something. And just that sort of thing. So anyway, but I would like to really look at that after we're done with the restrictions that we have now. And So, and I just wanted to say that for the school board highlights, I've just been doing these meetings, the official meetings, and not putting out anything from the other meetings, which are more about facilities. But if people wanted me to do that, I could do that. But I've just been doing the monthly meetings.
I'm not sure if it was Krista or Steve, and I see you, Kevin. So hang on.
Yeah, so my only other comment was around maybe developing a little more streamlined workflow for when we do get inundated by questions over a particular issue, how we organize those, how we distribute them, how we tackle getting responses to people. We can see that if the topic is contentious enough, we can overwhelm the resources we have to respond to it in a timely manner. We don't have a dedicated PR department to spend all day answering questions, so we have to be strategic about it. And that might be a good thing to fit into this plan somehow.
Okay, Krista, and then Kevin, and then Rob.
I'll wait until other folks have gone.
Okay. Kevin.
A little bit of a follow on about the watering hole thing is I I think I don't have an issue with meetings set up in each town for the convenience of people in each area, but I think they really need to be a district-wide meeting, a district-wide invite, as opposed to a town, and get away from siloing things. Couple other comments or thoughts is that we do have some dates in here that seem pretty rigid, 2 days for this, within a week for that type of thing. And I don't know if we're doing that or can do that. Some of that stuff sounds pretty tight, so we may want to revisit that. And then it's just a nit, but the footer here that recognizes hardwood, I think we could just do that as a footnote at the end or something like that, as opposed to having it on every page.
Okay. All right. Rob?
Yeah, sort of piggybacking off Steve, when I read this document, which I do appreciate, that, it seems like if this is a communication, looking outward, the board communicating outward, and just, I'm not sure if we have, that process of when communication is coming in, and then how we sort of channel that, whether they're questions, feedback, or whatever. I know I think we do, but I would like to maybe have a more formalized sort of document, not just like the complaint document that we looked at I don't know if that's last week or 2 weeks ago, but just other forms of communication, so that when it comes in, and then if it needs to go back out, sort of how we handle that process. And yeah, to sort of Kevin's point, the lead time piece there, like 3 to 4 weeks, and man, that seems like at points in this process we haven't even come close to some of that lead time format. And I don't know, just something I noticed that was the big thing that jumped out at me when I was looking at this document. We're dealing with major decisions, and I know we're trying our best, but if that's really sort of what we want to have, we've got some work to do then.
All right, Krista.
I was, just looking back under the deliverables, not just the watering hole, but the gathering of input, number 3. And, just thinking that this document's a little bit having like an identity crisis in a way. I think most of it is around communication we put out. So some good principles for around PR and, communicating with folks. But it's less robust around the way we connect with folks and get their input back in. And so I wonder if that is more appropriate to include those sorts of things in the conversation we're going to have next, which is around, community engagement, so that we're not trying to, there's so much in here that's really around like what, what tools should we use and what sort of techniques to get all of this information out in a digestible and timely way to folks, and have that be what this is for, and and then address how we're gathering input and engaging with our community in different ways in a separate place.
Yep. All right. I'm not seeing any. Oh, Steve.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I have less of an issue with what this document is trying to do. I think it serves that purpose. We may not be tiptoeing down the line exactly the way it's laid out, but I think it's a good guide. And I agree we could have another guide for the other purpose.
Okay. Anyone else? I did want to make one comment. On the page, what would be the third page, there is a the sentences, in that case, they would include their plan to do so in their leadership report, and the board would approve or discuss as part of the consent agenda. That's not happening that way. So I think that really we should discuss as a part of a future agenda, because that tends to be what is happening if we've got something that's taking board action. It's usually as its own separate agenda item. So I just think if we remove the consent and just as part of a future agenda would be more accurate of what's happening. So Krista, I'm thinking like, I see you're taking notes, I'm taking notes. So it sounds like it's going to come back again for another view to see if we've captured things. And then some of the issues that don't really fit in this might be addressed in another place that we're going to talk about in a little bit. That would definitely all come back to the board for review again as well.
Sounds good.
Okay. So is there any action we'd like to take on the board communication structure? As in maybe you want to update it with some of the changes tonight and bring it back at the next meeting?
Does that need a motion, Don, do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be wise.
So I move that the chair and vice chair work on the suggested changes to the communication structure and process and bring back to the board at the next regular meeting.
Okay.
I'll second Andrew.
All right. So Krista, Andrew, any clarifications on that? Okay. All right. All those in favor, give me a thumbs up. Anybody opposed? Okay. Any abstentions? All right. It passed. Okay. All right. The next action item is the additional questions for the superintendent. I'd like to sort of relax the rules a little bit just to get some clarity about how to do it before we step into this. In the past, we went around and board members gave their individual questions. You have the list that was included in the packet. Or do you want to go through them as a group and work through them that way? Andrew.
Could we just read through them each one at a time and do a thumbs up majority to see if people want to take a look at that one and then come back, scratch the ones that didn't have a majority so we don't talk about each one of them in depth?
That sounds like an idea. What do you think about that? Krista, do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, I'm good with that as long as, I mean, it would be great if we've already answered the question or we are referring to a document where that question is answered. Then maybe Patrick could chime in with that or something like that.
Okay, Steve?
I guess I'd like to get a little bit of feedback on what Patrick and Floyd might think about answering all the questions. Just if it's really just way out of time whack, or it's complicated, or if it'd be possible to give maybe a short response if the question isn't something that can be handled right off the bat. Like that would take 3 weeks of 5 people trying to uncover some information before we could answer that question. But maybe give us a status with what they think about the questions. I'm just curious if there's to get some feedback from Patrick and Floyd on it.
Well, I think not all questions are created equal, that's for sure. There are individual questions here that are hours and hours of work to respond to. So when I think about that and the collective, this list in its entirety is days and days of teams of people to produce answers for. I also think the takeaway for the board ranges from questions too, in terms of how it advances the work. So yeah, I guess that's my reaction to the concept of answering all of the questions, is it will take a very, very high number of hours to do so.
Anyone else? All right. How about trying out Andrew's idea where we read through the question and give a thumbs up, and let's see where that takes us? What do you think? Steve?
Well, I guess, unfortunately to that point, we could throw a bunch of thumbs up at hours and hours of work if we didn't really have a good idea of what we were signing up for. I look at some of these questions and I'm thinking, well, maybe somebody's got that, in a spreadsheet. They just have to look it up. And some of them I could probably imagine, you would have to do some research. It might be helpful to at least get your thought about it before we vote on it. Like maybe you want to say, okay, I think that one's going to be tough, and then we could vote on it.
Yeah, and I would extend that to my team that's here tonight as well, because different people have different roles of responding to some of these. But I think, so here are two questions that I'm looking at on the same page here. One is, how many coaches and coordinators have been hired since 2016? Not a problem. Another one is there a way to quantify the value of a very small school experience? Is there a way to quantify the value of a smaller school experience? Days. Right? So that's the range.
Right. So it's just, it might be helpful to, if you had at least a brief something to say about the question before we voted on it. That's all.
To do that, Patrick, if we hear from you first, we'll read the question and then we'll hear from you and then we'll vote. How about we try it like that?
And I would say either me or a member of my team if they're better poised to respond.
All right, Liz, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was also wondering, I guess I should listen to the questions first, but then afterwards, if we had a question that we wanted to present, and also just some of it being, I think of the consultant that we have coming in as being, also maybe let us know if you think some of the questions are something they might be able to answer well for us as a part of their service, right? So like the second one you asked, they might have a comment on that, or they might have an idea about that. So I would hope that some of this work could go to the DMG.
Sandy?
I'm also wondering, Patrick, for the questions that can be answered relatively quickly or obtained through your team pretty quickly, is it, and not, I realize that you want us to make the decision about the question, so you don't look like you're selecting ones that you want to answer or not, understandably, but I do get what you mean. Some of these, you could get us an answer fairly quickly, and we might have a whole list that just comes right off. Do you see, and that get answered? And then the ones that are deeper, have you probably haven't even taken a stab yet at even just answering the ones that can be done in relatively painlessly, and then that will then break down and we can go from there. But I'm okay going through each of them if that's what we think is the best way of getting through them. I'm just wondering if there's a way of shortcutting that a little.
Sarah LaPearl?
I just don't want to have a 15-minute conversation about every single question. So if we could find a way to please be really brief about this part of the process, I think that would be really helpful.
Okay. Somebody else had their hand up on every... Okay, I'm not seeing whoever it was put their hand down. All right. Let's see, we have 8 questions in that first section. Let's start there. And then if we get to the bottom of the 8 questions and this was the wrong path to take, we'll reevaluate at that point. How's that? Okay. So the first question, I am interested in the per pupil cost per town with sped and construction bond costs removed. So Patrick, your comment?
Doable. I would say, I guess if I'm trying to think about how to even quantify this, a little amount of time, a medium amount of time, or a lot of time, I guess is sort of where I'm finding myself wanting to go just for simplicity's sake. That's probably in the medium range. And my question, which is probably true for every one of these, is toward what end? I just think it's important for the board to weigh, how does the answer to this question advance our process? Because we could ask lots of questions and I could get lots of answers that don't advance the process. And I think we are best served in focusing the organization's time and the board's time on responses that would advance the conversation.
Dave?
So I don't think it advances the conversation very much. I would say, however, that putting the numbers out the way they were put out was inflammatory, and I've gotten a ton of questions from the public, our owners, if you will, about, what do these numbers mean, and what, we have a bond, and what if the bond's taken out? And special ed is percentage supported by the state, and so, it would have been helpful if the numbers would have been put out with a lot more explanation than just flopping them on the table. But I don't think answering them at this point advances the conversation much.
All right, so you have Patrick comment. Thumbs up, would you like to ask this question? Or thumbs down for no? I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down, 2 sideways, and 1, 2 up. So 3 up. So this one's not getting asked. So we're going to cross that first one off. Okay. Is it possible to better present the components itemized of a per pupil spending analysis for each town? For example, if Lincoln students cost 28 per pupil and Bristol is at 16, what did the cost look like in 2018, 2019? Patrick?
Let Floyd weigh in. My sense is that's a medium to high. And again, the question about advancing the conversation.
I would agree, medium to even closer to high. Some of that historical data from 18 becomes a little.
It was, as we were first consolidating it, it's not quite as easily structured as the way we've built the last few budgets.
And as a note, some of this was explained in the presentation on March 9th. Krista.
Can you remind me, Floyd, from the presentation on per pupil spending, what year we were working with?
We're working with 22.
Again?
22.
Okay. So thumbs up.
A lot of that first question is in that presentation. You can carve out the debt. You can carve out no district allocation. There's some ability to slice and dice it to answer questions that maybe the board doesn't have as a whole, but maybe individually you have.
Okay. Based on that, thumbs up if you want to ask the question. Thumbs down if you do not want to ask the question. 1, 2, 3, 4 down. 1, 2 sideways. 1, 3 up. So not getting asked that question. Okay. What are the necessary components that were included in the analysis to arrive at this number? Patrick? Oh, Krista?
I guess I'm not sure I even understand the question. Necessary components that were included in the analysis to arrive at this number, or perhaps the answer is it's what was in the presentation. I think there was some explanation of what obviously grouped types of costs that were included in the cost per pupil by school.
Krista?
Yes, related to Patrick's point, I'm just wondering if for some of these, if these are all board generated, if anybody wants to elaborate on their thinking or, explain more what this was referring to, that might be helpful.
I believe I might have asked these. I mean, this would have been a long time ago. Krista, this is Rob. Yeah, so I mean, that question was to the question above, if that makes sense, I believe, when I asked it. I'd have to go back and maybe look at my email. But I believe I did ask that. And yeah, it was in reference to the question above, if that makes sense. It did in my head at the time. Yeah, and I believe, as you move down too, possibly that they're connected.
Okay. So I'm assuming Patrick and Floyd that would be a part of the medium to hard to answer if it ties into the same information as the above question.
Well, if it ties into the same information as above, if it's specific to FY22, which is what we presented on, then I think that's already answered. If it's the historical piece, then it's still more work.
Krista?
Yeah, what I'm wondering, and I don't know if it's appropriate to ask this of you, Rob, or to ask another board member during a meeting about this, but what I'm wondering is if what you're, one of the things you're trying to understand better is kind of how has per pupil spending changed in the past 4 years or so since we became a unified district, and how, and just understanding those drivers and
No, totally. I mean, these questions were fallout from that Addison Independent article, to be very frank, where those numbers were presented and there was no context. And I just kept getting phone call and emails and folks just really concerned that there was such a disparity between the different schools in our district. And so, I'm just asking questions to get a better sense of, I guess, historically what they looked at, because to know where you're at now, you sort of have to know where you were. And, being a new board member, I agree that your presentation from a couple weeks ago does answer some of these questions. And so, that's where I was at in regards to that. And I guess just a process piece, like I sort of feel bad that I've asked questions. I feel like, I've been told that I'm supposed to be the informed agent, and I don't know when this comment I should make it, but I'm going to make it now. There's a board meeting where I felt belittled by the way that these questions were read. And I sort of feel that way now. And I don't like it. It doesn't feel good. I want to be informed. We've said we're the informed agents. And so I'm going to ask questions. And if you don't feel they're relevant, then you can give me that feedback. But I just feel like I've been belittled for trying to ask questions to have a better understanding of our school district, of this process we're going through, so that I can be the informed agent. So if it comes to an up or down vote, I can say, this is why I voted, because I have the data to support that. And another piece, we've mentioned that our community members, if they're not going to vote for something, or they're going to vote against something, I should say, then they need to know what they're voting for. And a lot of people are asking questions because they want to know if they're going to vote against something, what they're voting for. And to make people bad for asking questions and wanting to be informed should not be how we go about this as a board. And, I feel there's a lot of people out there, and some people might just say, well, they're the squeaky minority. I don't feel that's the case. When you look at the comments from the survey, people just want to have a better grasp of, the challenges we're facing and the decisions as we move forward, so that they know what they're either voting for or against. And so I just have to say that because it's been on my mind for so long, and I don't like feeling bad for asking questions. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I hope that's all she ever does is ask questions, so she can be informed and go about the world knowing how it and why it works the way it does.
Hey, Rob, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. I think, in an interesting way, board work it's strange. We're disconnected. And also it's hard because the discourse isn't like we would normally do sometimes in just regular conversations. So I appreciate these questions. I ask them myself, and I feel at a limit to find the answer. And I feel like I need to go find it myself if I can't get it from, the people who have the numbers. So for example, I've always wondered what was the history even before we became a district about costs, and why are the costs being represented in the way they are for people now? And I realize I'm sure Floyd could explain it to me if I sat with him, he'd be like, Sandy, this is, how it works. But it's been a while, since I've been on the board. And so those specific details, they're harder for me to grasp. And I think a lot of community members also do. And so things like historical data, like why, we managed before we became a unified district somehow to manage our budgets, and towns were able to manage their town schools. And granted, numbers might have been different, but they were able to address them, and local towns were able to make decisions and be informed and have town meeting day and be able to ask a lot of questions and receive presentations from their local school board, really laying it out and explaining why the costs were what they are. And I'm not so certain that the towns are understanding why their number is what it is to the same extent that they used to be able to access that information, and be involved in that process. And again, I always felt this was going to be a major challenge when we became a unified district. How are we going to help each town who has a school understand what's happening with the costs and why? And I think that's why we're getting so many of these questions from the community. And so, simple, like, this is what it was. I know it's really hard, right? How do you take a pre-unified district and explain how things worked? And then I probably could get the annual reports. I probably could get old town meetings from each of the towns and actually look at the school budget portion, right? And go to each town office and look at that and then try to compare it. And I may do that. And it's a lot of work to ask, for the office to do, but it's all out there. And I just think that people want to know so that they can understand what this means now. Like, why are the numbers reflecting? And I know it's not the same 28 to 16K. You guys in your presentation, earlier this month did sort of, maneuver it a little bit, trying to explain a little better what the components were. So I don't think those are still the numbers, but I'm still left with what happened. Like, what happened when I was informed, and now all of a sudden I feel so uninformed and I still don't understand what's happening. So I don't know if you guys can help us so that we can also, as a group, explain it to our unified community. This is what's happening.
Can I just jump in? I'm often asked this same question. And if you look at it I'm going to really oversimplify it because that's what the issue is across.
So let's say we have a position in a school that costs $10,000 for that position. And if you have 75 students, it costs $133 per student to pay for that $10,000. If you have 256 students, for that same cost that needs to be borne in both schools, it costs $39 per student. Now, if you look at historical, if that same school that is now at 75 students was at 120 at that same $10,000 figure, it was $83. So that jump from $83 to $133 is 60%. So there's a 60% increase in the cost per student because you're decreasing your number, it's getting smaller, and that's with a flat number on the top side. That's the oversimplification. It's a big number being divided by a small number, or a big number being divided by a little bit bigger number. And that's where the disparity comes from. Nobody thinks that we shouldn't have a librarian in every one of our schools. The issue is that the librarians cost, in this example, $10,000. And in one school, to provide a librarian, it costs $133 per student. In another school, to provide that librarian, which everybody agrees we should have, because it's about equity for the student, not equity for the taxpayer, not equity for the budget. It's every student should have a librarian. So in a school that has 256 children, it costs $39. That's the disparity that gets reflected on a per pupil basis. That's also the economies of scale of why consolidation from a strictly numbers standpoint allows us to be able to deliver a librarian to every child, as opposed to having to cut librarians from every child. And I'll get off my soapbox, but that's the really simple version of what happens.
And
I'm going to ask you to hold your thought. I'm going to ask you, Sandy, because other people have had their hands up, and I want to get a chance to hear from everybody. So just hold your thought, okay? Krista.
No, go around, Don. I've already spoken.
Okay. Kristen.
Yeah, I know that it's surprising how much the number of students has gone down just in the 4 years since we've been consolidated. And having been on the Moncton board quite a few times before that, you know, towns did do their own process, and the towns had a lot more students 4 years ago. I don't have the numbers, but it's shocking to me how much smaller Moncton has gotten, and part of that might be the students out because of COVID, and they'll come back. But I just wanted to mention one thing, that when some renovations were done at some schools years ago, I know board members at the time said, you know, should we be doing any major renovations? And the superintendent at the time said, well, we don't need to look at consolidation yet. Let's just kick this down the road a little bit. So, so people had asked those questions years ago when people were doing renovations. So it's not something that hadn't been discussed. But anyway, so I just want to say I'm shocked at how many students less there are, you know, even in the last 4 years.
Andrew, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I just wanted to be mindful of time. We're not even halfway through the first page in a 4-page document, and we have kicked this out, I think, a fair number of meetings.
Right, we have. This is the third attempt at getting to it. Krista.
What I was going to say before is, one, I don't think any of us should ever feel like we can't ask questions. What I keep thinking is a lot of these questions are kind of symptomatic of the lack of time to revisit the per pupil spending or some of the other documents where maybe they would have come up. And I just wonder if we could put that back in the hopper to look at that document again. And the other thing I think that is coming up for us is just, you know, trying to forget it, I'm muddled. I'm going to leave my thought there, that if we can revisit per pupil spending and ask questions that might have come up for us after we saw that, we might not need to go through all of these right here.
Sandy, thanks for waiting.
Oh, no, thank you. I totally appreciate that, Dawn. Thanks for making sure we all participate. Just quickly, I actually appreciate the nuts and bolts, Floyd, in terms of the simple explanation, because it is helpful to like have a good base for that. But and in doing so, what that really highlighted for me was, why are we doing it that way? Because, you know, you could put every Lincoln student in Bristol, and that one librarian will now cost $2 a student. But would you really only have one librarian for 500 students? Probably not. So the numbers, like you were saying, I totally get it. I did economics in college. It's supply, demand, cost efficiencies. And this is definitely the work we're going to do when we look at the proposals, is to ask ourselves, it's not really equity is not obviously as many students from the one librarian, because we wouldn't get equity that way, right? And so that's why it can't be measured that way, versus, what are you getting when you have a school in a particular environment and you're matching it accordingly based on the numbers in need, right? And so, right, it's much more complicated, and I do appreciate the nuts and bolts, but it does bring me back to why we're looking at each school separately per pupil based on that model, when we're supposed to be looking at it from a district point of view, and how can we really work it. So that'll be our challenge. That'll definitely be our challenge.
Kristen?
I was just going to say, Sandy, it was looked at that way because members of the community asked for that breakdown, asked for that number. So it wasn't generated by those guys. It was generated by the community, and we listened to them and answered that. And then so that's why that came about.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Okay. So we're not through 8 questions, and it's 8 o'clock. Does it work to revisit the March 9th presentation and see if any of these questions still remain? I don't know what agenda it'll go on, because it's at this point, the April 13th meeting is going to be occupied by at least a couple hours with something else. The same thing could be done for the proposals questions around the superintendent's proposal. We could revisit that and those questions. Okay, I'm seeing nodding. Now we're getting into the staffing and coordinating coaches and coordinators questions. And we don't have another presentation like the other ones did. So shall we go through those questions and see if they're questions we want to ask? Okay. Could you provide the following ratios for FY23 and FY26? I'm wondering if these will change, knowing that we will see a decrease in students and staff over the time. So the ratio was students to FTE classroom teacher, students to FTE support staff, and students to combined FTE. Patrick, do you have any insight on the depth of that question and what it would take? It reminded me of that question that was asked when we did Act 46, where it depends on who you ask the question to.
And I think to some extent, this is, so comparing, maybe the focus is on 26. I think some of this is in the December 7th presentation, where I show class sizes approximated in a couple of different scenarios. Might be 23 and 26. I'd have to look back at that. We could take a look at that. I think the trick becomes, so classroom teacher is pretty specific, and that is pretty clear at the elementary level. It gets a little bit more tricky when we get to the secondary level. And what do you consider a classroom teacher? Is the band teacher a classroom teacher? Whereas in the elementary perspective, the music teacher probably wouldn't be considered a classroom teacher. We're probably talking about sort of homerooms if we think about it that way. So it does start to need to get unpacked, or it can leave room for interpretation. I would consider this probably a medium amount of work to pull together those ratios as we project out, given what enrollment and staffing would be. And again, I'm curious what scenario this is in reference to when we look out to FY23 and FY26, because these ratios are going to change if we're looking at all schools open, repurposing as I propose, school closures. It just changes, and I'm not sure which scenario I should be doing this for, or all of them.
Does it make sense to revisit these questions upon review of that December 7th presentation?
Yeah, or a little more specificity about what scenario specifically would I be projecting these ratios for?
Andrew?
So I'm just making a comment on the question, which is, it's probably interesting information, but I think we can get drowned in information, and I'm not sure even if I knew what these ratios were, how that would help me think about the proposal, because that feels so so means oriented to getting into those ratios. I just can't see how that's helpful, at least to me.
Sandy?
Patrick, have you been able to give these questions to Nate Richardson by chance? Because I'm wondering if, I only ask that because I'm wondering if you would have suggestions on how information can be shared when we have our questions for him, such that he may be able to address many of these things, or after we have this, information about ways that we can answer a lot of the questions that we have, we might be able to more tailor it to what we think would be relevant. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm not sure we've come across a question yet that I think makes sense to ask of Nate. Like, I wouldn't ask Nate to tell us what the FY26 ratios are for an unknown scenario like that. The work he would have to do to understand that and pick my brain and tap into the resources we have here, and then at his hourly rate that he gets to do that, I'm not sure is necessarily the way we would want to invest that time and money.
Sure. I wasn't thinking in terms of him answering them. I was thinking more of when he sees sort of the questions that the board's been asking thus far, he might have a better sense of what is it that we're seeking just based from his experience. He'll get a gist of, okay, this is kind of where the questions in the area, maybe if we can present information this way, we'll answer whole blocks of information such that we understand it. I think it will help him ahead of time to get a sense of the kind of questions we've been asking and ways he can say, I might have a way that I can help answer a lot of those just by talking about the structures and how we can get to that. And maybe the process, if he can explain the process we're going to go through, and in fact, we'll address these large blocks of areas. Do you see? So that, because he's going to be asking what our questions are. It might not be such a bad thing for him to just see just in general what we've been asking. And he can say, well, that I can't really see how that would be relevant, but I get where that person was coming from. I can think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful to think of it that way. I was thinking you were thinking that he would answer these.
No.
But I think even just thinking about the way they're organized, I think could help that as well, to see that, okay, they have staffing questions, they have program questions.
Right.
Could be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Dave?
And that would be a starter for him, like a little preview.
A heads up. Here's what you're getting into, right?
Right, exactly.
Things that they're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
My turn?
Dave, yes.
So I think the only real question is the one that Patrick referred to earlier, which I didn't see on the list. I guess maybe I missed it. What's the advantage of small schools versus smaller schools? That's really what we're trying to get at, isn't it? I mean, if you buy the notion that we have to do this in as cost-effective process as we possibly can, we have to do this as cheap per pupil as we can, and in order to accomplish that, we need to put as many students as possible into the same building, and thereby be able to reduce staffing by 50 or whatever number of staff people, teachers of our children, and manage them with a greater number of administrative people, then Patrick's proposal is the only way to go. And why are we wasting our time between now and August? I want to somehow find out if our children would be well served by having community schools in each of our elementary schools in each of our towns. And if they are, then why aren't we doing it that way? So my question really is the one that Patrick referred to as being too hard to answer, and that is, are smaller schools better than small schools?
And I guess I would phrase that just a little differently. I don't know that the goal is necessarily to spend as little per pupil as possible. It's more, given that cost per pupil is fixed, if we choose to believe that, given the spending threshold and penalties and things of that nature, how best do we invest those fixed dollars in pursuit of the outcomes for students that we want? Not necessarily, because we could spend a lot less per student than the spending threshold, but I don't think that's what we're after. I think we're trying to figure out how do we use the resources we think are reasonable and that the community will support in the way that gets the best outcomes for students.
I would wager a case of beer with anybody who wishes to engage in that wager that the threshold's going to change dramatically in the next 5 years. And to base our decisions based on the spending threshold that the state is making is an error. We need to do the best we can for our children and sell the dollar amount, whatever it is, to our taxpayers.
Great. Kevin. You're muted.
Oh,
there you go.
So the comment keeps coming back that we're top heavy in management. There's too much management. I am concerned that that is trash talk quite a bit by the feet on the ground that see coaches and interveners and all grouped into that term management. And I think as a board, we need to be very careful about the distinction between what the perception of management is when we're talking to the boots on the ground, as opposed to what we need to be doing to advance a multi-tiered system.
That's my trash talk based on hours of testimony at the legislature about how Act 46 was going to reduce administration because the superintendent's job was going to go from 20 meetings a month to a couple meetings a month, that we were going to see a reduction in assistant superintendents because the job is going to be much better and the superintendent is going to be able to be much more involved in the education of the pupils, that administration in the central office was going to be dramatically reduced. But in particular, the business officers have an organization that testified in the legislature that they were going to save $31 million statewide in reduced bookkeeping costs. Now, these things just have not occurred in our district. And so if you want to accuse me of trash talking, all right, that's me. I'll put it on to me.
Dave, a little bit has to do with not necessarily you, but we hear a lot of conversation on the streets of management becoming top heavy. And quite often, if you read between the lines, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, is coaches and interveners and anybody other than who the individual talking to you is, as far as their labor class is, gets grouped into that category of management and therefore becomes top heavy management and is the bad guys. So I think when we start talking across the spectrum, we need to be careful about that term.
Kristen.
Yeah, I'm concerned that we're not following the agenda now, and I feel like we need to structure our meetings differently to manage the agenda better and have these debates on other times, or something. So I'm just concerned right now we're not following the agenda and we're getting off into other discussions, and that it's 8:16, and I'd like to spend some time with my kids tonight before they go to bed. So I don't know if we can focus more on this list and what we're doing.
Okay, Steve?
Ditto.
Okay, back to the list. Okay, so that last question can be possibly addressed when we revisit the December 7th presentation. And I think, Patrick, you had coaches and coordinators as well in that presentation. Is that correct? Or am I thinking of a different one?
I don't recall. They were definitely in the spreadsheets.
Yes.
That really simple, easy to follow 22 tab Google Sheets document. It's all right there for sure, and understandably a lot of unpacking there. The question though of what are the costs of coordinators and coaches, that's easy to calculate. How many coordinators and coaches have been hired since 2016, also easy to calculate. So there's a couple of easy ones.
Okay. Okay. Or do you want to give a thumbs up or thumbs down for the easy ones? If we have two easy ones, we have the potential to make a decision. How about the two easy ones? You want to give the heads up on those two? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 up and 2 down. It's just so looks like that one goes ahead. So if you those two, if they're easy, looks like the board in general would like those answers. Liz, do you have your hand up?
I was just hoping that they'd come along with a little explanation of what they do, not with the numbers of who they are. That's all. That would just be because I understand some of those roles differently as well. So or to have different purpose. Just some context for those would be great. Thank you. Sorry I didn't get that.
That's all right. And just for clarity, the context, so the questions there were about numbers. The context, happy to provide, and I think it makes sense to provide a little bit about what they do, and also part of how they fit in the system of that multi-tiered system of supports that has been referenced a couple of times here.
So it almost looks like that might be able to answer it on the next page. There's it might provide some insight into one of those questions on that next. Could MTSS operate differently? It might just gives us a view of how it operates within your description. So how about there's a question on the next page. Is the MTSS model is it one we can ultimately afford? I almost feel like there was some research done on that before we adopted the program. Back when we were ANESU, there were reasons why that we took steps towards that. I remember a report called Numbers Counts, and that was the beginning of all that work with Michael Jean Greco that started us down the path of the MTSS system.
Yeah, so that I would categorize that one as more philosophical than factual, right? I might respond to that by saying, I'm not sure we can afford not to have an effective multi-tiered system of supports if our goal is improving outcomes for students. That's really essential. It is that is the system that supports our struggling students.
Krista.
I was just going to say, I thought it was also referenced in the DMG or PICUS Odin and or PICUS Odin reports. And just off the cuff, Patrick, is that a universal system that's employed by most of the districts in our state?
Yeah, it's enacted upon in different ways. I think the focus on core instruction and then helping to ensure that meets roughly 80% of the needs of our students, and then having a targeted system of supports that supports another 15% or so, and then a really intensive level of support that is intended to sort of bring students who need much more support up to grade level. The idea is that through these tiers of support, 100% of our students are proficient. The core instruction meets 80%, core instruction plus targeted meets 95%, core instruction plus targeted plus intensive gets us to the 100%. That concept, that multi-tiered system of support, is expected to be in place across all school districts in the state of Vermont. What positions they have in place at those different levels and how they support those different tiers varies across districts. I would say it is true that more and more frequently what we're seeing are districts deploying resources in a way similar to ours. That's the direction, that's the trend, if we're thinking about it from a trend perspective. The trend is not to go away from all the things that we've been putting in place, despite hardships and financial challenges that a lot of districts are experiencing. And I think, again, thinking about DMG, and sort of related to that and talking with Don, I think I shared at our last meeting a book study that the admin team is doing that I think does a really nice job of, in straightforward terms, speaking to the kinds of systems that are important to have in place to meet the needs of struggling learners. It's actually a book written by Nate Levinson. So in talking with Don, we ordered a copy of that book for the entire board because I think it does a nice job of putting together a lot of things we've talked about here and there and kind of tying it together in an organized way that just makes sense. So that's on its way for those that are interested in taking a look at that and helping. I think it speaks to our MTSS a great deal, both places that we've grown and areas we need to continue to grow, which I think is important context for our work, regardless of our financial challenges, but perhaps especially in light of our financial challenges.
Steve?
Patrick, I'm curious if it might be a reasonable expectation for this system to mature, but right now it's new. And a lot of it's new because we're a new district and you're trying to kind of pull this all up from the ground up. If some of it was being done at Mount Aid before the other schools started to pick it up. But could you see there being enough historical knowledge in the staff and in their exposure to the coaches and coordinators that you have available now that they would be able to shoulder some of this burden with fewer of those helpers down the road once that historical knowledge was grown?
Yeah, I think I would agree that there's greater need in getting the district to a point where we want to be, and perhaps less need in sustaining it once we get there, which I think is kind of what you're speaking to. And so this is year 3 with some of the, I think this is year 3 that we're in with some of the changes that we made and the improvements to the system. So we had a year and a quarter of COVID, a year that was just getting up and going. So unfortunately, there are some things that have gotten in the way that have delayed the effects of the systems that we're putting in place, which is unfortunate, and it is our reality. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where my mind took me based on what you're asking. And I think, NBA players, the best in the world, have multiple coaches they work with every single day to continue to improve their performance. Education's no different, right? We need to continue to grow and perfect instructional practices in pursuit of improving outcomes for students. So I don't think we ever get to a point where we can say we are there, wherever that is, and we no longer need these structures and supports in place.
Sarah LaPearl?
I just want to echo that what I heard last spring from both of my kids' teachers were how instrumental the coaches were in really aligning everybody and getting everything moving super fast. And I know that doesn't have to do with this conversation, but it also has, I think, really helped not calibrate, but kind of equate, like get all the schools kind of moving into the same direction. And the more schools that we have, the more coaches we have to kind of help sort of align everybody as we move forward. And that would just be my side story. And also coaches and interventionists are considered part of the teacher's contract. And so they are not administration from my understanding.
That's true.
Okay. So, all right. Between the PICUS and the Otis and the DMG, it sounds like we can personally get a little more information on those questions.
The AOE website has a great page on it as well with a lot of resources.
Okay.
For MTSS.
Okay. Right.
And actually in the document that just went out this afternoon, that had some of the financials, but also had the list of educational resources. There's a link there to the MTSS field guide, which I think is probably what Katrina might be referring to.
Okay. So we can do a little homework on our own on that one. Okay. The next set of questions is around students and demographics. So the first question is asking what's the breakdown per town in regards to the overall students in the K-12 system for FY23? And then what does the breakdown look like for FY26?
I would say that's it's a medium.
Okay.
I would say it gets a little trickier when we think about it, the breakdown at the secondary level. If this is specific to elementary level, it's a little easier to give the breakdown by town because students go to the school in that town. So it's easier to kind of map out. But that's sort of on the easy to medium to gather information on.
Okay. All right. How do you all feel about that? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways? Let's see. 2 up. 1. 3 up. And 4 up. And Sarah, I can't see yours. Oh, sideways. 1, 2, 3 sideways and 1 down. So we're kind of at a standstill on this one. Okay, let's see. Another one's asking about a breakdown of free and reduced lunch per town, by town. The next one is asking. Is that information easily available? Medium, hard? What's that one look like?
I'd say that's easy.
Okay. And then I think the next one ties to that also with the weighting report, which shows 11% poverty rate in our district. Are you able to explain the disparity of these numbers? I think
It starts to get more complicated because they're different measures.
Okay. So the first question is easy, to give a breakdown of free and reduced lunch. Is anybody interested in that question? By town. 3 up, 1, 2, 3, 5 up, and 6 up and 3 sideways. So that one looks like one to ask. Okay. And the other part was complicated because
I can just explain briefly. We measure our poverty rate as a school system for our purposes based on the free and reduced lunch applications and those that are approved. The 11% poverty rate is based on a different measure, which I think has to do with who qualifies for, it's not food stamps anymore, but that benefit at the state level.
3
So
squares.
they're different measures. And Dave may have been involved in some of that questioning, so he may be able to elaborate on that, but that's as I understand it.
Yeah. Dave?
I think that's an accurate description, and it's the same one I've gotten from the Agency of Education. I think that it would be helpful as we make an argument for changing, or I would say more accurately reflecting poverty with respect to the weighting study. If we had, if you could develop a memo or something that explained what our position is with regard to the number of students we have in poverty. I don't know how difficult that is, but I think that would be helpful for me to make an argument with legislators that it shouldn't be 11%. It really should be whatever, 20, 30, 40%.
What would the criteria be, Dave?
Well, I think we should make our own argument. What are our criteria? Are they eligible for free lunch? If that's what our argument is, then what's that number? And then I can take that to legislators and argue for, because I think 11% does represent, it's a different agency. It's the Agency of Human Services, so it's way in a different silo than the Department of Education, Agency of Education. And the other thing is that they're measuring households, and we educate kids. We don't educate households. So I think, if you could develop a memo without too much difficulty that put forth what our argument is for the number of kids we have in poverty, that would be helpful in me advocating for better numbers in the weighting study.
Well, I think the information related to that question above is what is that figure town by town, and then really we can look at it as a district. And as a district, we're in the 35% range. That is the metric that we've used as a school system, or school systems in Vermont have used for probably decades. That it's the measure of the students that are eligible for free reduced lunch.
All right, then let's use that measure and argue, and then we'll get other school districts doing the same.
All right. Moving along. Is there the question is, if the district has a sense of what schools the 77 pandemic home study students withdrew from? Patrick, is that something that you have record of?
Yeah, I can get the list of students that are, I wouldn't give names, of course, but the number of students per school that are enrolled in a home study program for the first time this year. I think is what that is really asking.
Yep. So thumbs up. Do you want that? Do you want to send Patrick on to answer that question? It's an easy one. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Four, five up, one sideways, two sideways, and one down. So that one, if that looks like an easy one, so that one, Patrick. Next question is, how can we understand the impact of the infusion of additional students into Bristol and Moncton? What will change? Will the current delivery of services look different with more students?
Yeah, I think to some extent I addressed that in my December 7th presentation as well, speaking about the availability of resources in the repurposed buildings, which does bring students under fewer roofs. Okay. I don't know. I would say at least to some extent that's addressed.
Okay.
In that December 7th presentation.
So if we revisit that we'll have some clarity if need be around that one. Okay. How will any decisions made affect the educational experience for our students.
Don, can I speak to the last one for a second?
Sure.
Patrick, one thing that I actually went back and watched a couple of those again the other night just to kind of get my head back around it again. And I think when they were first put out, there might have been a text that came along with them, which I can't find anymore. I don't know if it's because of the reorganization of the website. And I think some of the things that you state about what services are available during what scenarios, unless you listen to the entire thing and memorize what you say, you can't find it in a written document. And if you're just trying to refer to it, kind of to compare one scenario to another, it's difficult to pick that up.
Yeah, there was a script attached to that, and it sort of went slide by slide. So each slide was numbered, and then the script for that slide was there so that people could basically see what I said in writing relative to the slide that it's referring to. I can get that script redistributed or back on or get it on the website, make sure it's available if that seems to be lost somewhere.
Right, and I have to say that I think the letter that came out last week or the week before asking about that level of service in 26, because you did a pretty good job of describing what the scenario was going to be like in 22, 23 with the consolidation. And then you did a pretty good job of describing what the what the do nothing approach was going to do in 26. But I had trouble finding the explanation of what the consolidation was going to look like in 26 and what those services were going to look like. And I think that might have been part of why that letter got generated.
Okay.
Right. So back to the question, how will any decision made affect the educational experience for our students? What do you think about that one, Patrick?
Yeah, I just don't want to lose the question that Steve just posed. Okay. Sorry, you're looking at the last bullet, Don. How will any
under
decision
student and demographics.
Sorry, I guess I'm not seeing the question that you're looking at right now.
How will any decision made affect the educational experience for our students? Am I in the right place?
I see it now. Yep. Okay. I guess I would look for more clarity there. How will any decision affect the educational experience for our students? There are many, many, many decisions that could be made. I guess I'm not sure which decisions I would be assessing.
Okay. I don't know if whoever asked that is here, or I'll have to go back and probably dig a little deeper and see who asked that question.
And I guess from my perspective, which is sort of what led to the recommendation that I made, is spreading a fixed number of staff members across more buildings is less efficient and therefore reduces the support and services we can provide to children. I think is how I would, with that sort of general question, that would be the general response that I would give.
Okay. All right, we'll keep moving along. The next group of questions is merger questions. So one of them is there any interest in pursuing the idea of 7 through 9 in one building and 10 through 12 in another? And I feel like the merger questions, we might need the merger study to do a little more work, or to have some of that work happen to get the answers to those. So,
yep.
All right. So I'm going to just put those as study. Maybe we pass them on to that group. Okay, bond facilities question. It was asking about the specific costs of the Lincoln bond and how it's spread about as an issue. So that.
Right. So that is the reality, that the Lincoln bond is spread out across all 5 towns currently, because it's in one budget that produces one tax rate that is assessed to each town equally.
Yep.
And this was, I think this is less about bond probably and more related to cost per pupil, I think, is as I'm reading this.
Okay.
But I may be missing something.
The second part of that question, the Mount Abe construction debt, and comparing that, Mount Abe doesn't have any construction debt.
Okay. Rob?
Maybe I'll go back to that presentation from a couple weeks ago, but just I thought when we looked at the numbers, when we compared the 5 town elementary schools, that Lincoln's debt was held in that cost per pupil for Lincoln, not spread across.
Yeah, maybe, and I don't know that we necessarily spoke to this in the presentation, but this may be helpful context when, in particular for the presentation, in looking at cost per pupil across the different schools, rather than sort of make up our own process, we wanted to follow a similar process to what was used pre-consolidation. So we looked at the costs that historically would have been associated with a school. And so it used to be all of Lincoln's debt was paid for by the taxpayers in Lincoln. Not really, because it's a statewide tax system, but sort of you get the idea. It was associated specifically with Lincoln Community School. And so in looking at cost per pupil, we wanted to follow as closely as we could. Things have changed as a merged district, but that's why that landed there.
And additionally, those improvements defer costs that other schools are repairs and maintenance that are happening in other schools.
Which is another reason to maybe have it as part of it. But it was broken out so you could clearly see it and discounted off. I think the last line in Patrick's presentation was the comparison without debt and without any district allocation, which told us the same story.
Dave?
I'm not going to say anything more.
Okay. All right. And then, so that may have been answered, that one, it sounds like. What year is the last MAUSD bond vote, and what was the bond amount, and what was the bond going to be used for? And mostly questions around the bond. And
those are easy.
Yeah. Still that file of information around the bond votes. You can do a Google search and go back and find, because each committee had documents out and on the website, so you can check back for that. Kevin?
I'm just asking how that is germane to the conversation.
Yep, that's Patrick's question. To what end would that information be valuable to this, just to making a decision?
Maybe if somebody wanted to see how much money we possibly would have to invest in Mount Abe, it might sway them. They're thinking about whether we want to continue to go down that road or not. I'm just conjecturing. I didn't ask the question.
Yep. So
then I keep a spreadsheet of votes, and it gives you a sense of how much it passed or how tight the vote was, to give you a sense of what the appetite is for increases, et cetera.
I think that historical reflection is germane.
Is that something you could answer, Floyd? Because that is an interesting question. Sounds like you know the answer.
The last vote was 1785 no, 1196 yes.
And I would just mirror what Steve said. I didn't ask the question, but I imagine it's, what are we going to do with our high school in its current shape and its future? I imagine that must be going to be put out there by somebody when we get proposals. But I'm done.
I can get those websites and put them in a place where everybody can look at them and go to it, kind of thing as well. So maybe on that facilities page there could be a little history section or something. Okay, and then there's an Act 46 question. Is the article that requires a town vote to close a school legally enforceable, constitutional?
Depends on which lawyer you ask.
We are unfortunately many, many months and many tens of thousands of dollars to answer that question.
Yeah. Okay. So is that a question that the board feels they want answered? Thumbs up, thumbs down? One, two, three up. Oh, well, now everybody, all right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sarah LaPearl, I can't see your thumb. Oh, there. So 4 up. 1, 2 sideways, and 1, 2.
Right, I'm confused on. I thought this was what we were already in legal conversations about. So I'm not. I feel like we're already exploring this. So I'm not really sure. You know, it's a question that's still on the table. It seems like already. Am I wrong?
No, that was my follow-up question was going to be, so what more am I charged with doing to provide the answer to that question than what we're in process of?
All right.
I think this is a completely different question. I mean, any of the legal people on this call should be able to look at this question and go, that's not what we're asking right now. This is just asking whether or not Act 46, whether the article we put in the Act 46 articles is constitutional in terms of its applicability to Act 46. And I don't think we're asking that question.
I mean, somebody is. It sounds like, right? Which I get it. When this question was asked, I don't know if it was before we had our lawyer meeting, but the question I have is, to get that answer, we're going to have to put out some bucks if you really wanted someone to research the constitutional history, which I think is probably fairly straightforward. We could talk to, Bill Mube, but am I really prepared for this answer, at this point, to spend thousands of dollars on it? Because Patrick isn't going to be able to answer it. He's going to have to go back to, Bill Mube. And I think we had our long executive session in which I think Mube, talked about all of these, what we need to do and what's going to happen, and that there probably will be all kinds of litigations. And I promise you, it'll be way more expensive than consulting with a lawyer than dealing with the litigation from this. So that's why I voted down. I'm just saying, in terms of conversation, is it something we need to spend, thousands of dollars contracting out to an attorney at this point? Maybe we might need something more later.
Andrew?
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if this is a question we return to if, after all the work we do with DMG and all that information comes forward and we've heard other proposals and the board has decided that this is Patrick's plan is still the plan we want to push forward with, that then we do a a deeper level of inquiry about that question. But basically, let's not spend money on that yet if we don't need to.
Yeah. Dave.
So the Ripton goes before the State Board of Education shortly. They'll make a decision that may or may not be appealed to the Vermont Supreme Court. 3 other towns are considering similar divorce from their unified districts, and there's a whole discussion going on regarding what's a union district and what's a unified union district, and whether you voted to get in or whether the state put you in or not. It's very likely that the answer to this question is going to be answered by the Vermont Supreme Court, and it may take a few years to get there.
So given the vote and those comments, I think we wait on this. And then there's one other question. What research shows us that this business model, economy of scale, works in education?
Good question. I feel like this is an area that Nate has a lot of experience in. He's worked with hundreds of districts struggling with exactly what we're struggling with. So this is an area that we could tap into his expertise and experience to get an answer to. And I think that's probably more relevant than me Googling research articles on this topic that probably are less relevant to the conversation than we wish they were.
Okay. So it looks like we've come up with some questions that we can get answers to, and looks like we have some that we're going to revisit when we look back at presentations. Rob?
Yeah, I mean, are we still able to continue to, I guess, as we move forward, hopefully ask questions? I don't know when the appropriate time is to bring up, but I think the letter that Steve was mentioning was from Aaron Rebel and signed by, hundreds, 100 plus members from all 5 towns in our district. And I think there's some really thoughtful questions in there throughout that document regarding, Patrick, your proposal, looking out to FY25 and 26. And then at the end of that letter, some really good big picture questions just for us to consider as we move forward in this process. I think they're wonderful questions that we really should grapple with. And then also, Herb Olson and company put together what I thought was a really detailed outline idea for a spreadsheet. And I know Patrick and Floyd, after that 2 meetings ago, I believe you were working on something similar. And I think they're not necessarily questions per se, but a working tool to maybe help people answer questions that they might have, or board members to answer questions they might have. Any resources that we can build, I think is time well spent personally. And I would support, looking at those metrics that Herb and others put together and see, what that you guys have built thus far. Is there anything on there that you could add from his letter? So I don't know when else to chime in on that, but they're relevant questions and ideas.
Krista?
So 2 different thoughts. One, if there is it possible, John, if there are additional one-off sorts of questions for the board to direct them to you, and you continue to collect them and we go back and look at them, each time we have a facilities meeting, or every other meeting or something like that. And that's one question I had. But then to the tools that Rob mentioned, those seem like really great things to bring to the DMG conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And see how they fit in. And I don't know if we all want to bring, if we all want to do some homework and look at those again and look at Floyd and Patrick's spreadsheet, and whatever else, we have on our facilities resource list that's on the webpage that we think would be helpful. And I wanted to ask if we could get a different version of the spreadsheet, Floyd, that's not in a PDF or that's a little bigger, easier to read. If I could try to look at it in the minutes, and it was like really, really tiny and hard to look at. So that's just a side note.
Krista, is that info site still open on the web page where the people were initially putting questions in? Is that still up and working for the community?
Yep. So so on the MAUSD homepage under the school board menu is the facilities planning page. Within that is the link to the FAQ that had been built in December, as well as the email where people could submit their FAQs or submit their questions. And that was, I think, for the community.
Right.
Are you talking about the board questions?
No, I was thinking about community members who might be coming up with questions, that if that's still operable and they could be used.
Yeah. I think it's been pretty quiet. Last time I asked Jennifer, it's been pretty quiet, but that is there.
Okay, and then board members could direct if they come up with additional questions, they can direct them to me, and then we can just sort of get into a routine of revisiting the questions and just making a group decision. Okay.
Just to sort of, I guess, a clarification, the intent, certainly on my part, has never been to not want to answer questions. It was really about to not want to stop everything teams of people are doing for days and days to answer questions from individuals that may not be questions the board is looking at, right? So trying to be wary of the work involved on lots of people's parts to operate a $31 million organization during a global pandemic, which is complicated enough, and to not stop all of that to respond to, as you saw, many, many, many individual questions that literally would have taken weeks of time of stopping the presses on lots of other things to get answers to. So trying to be responsive, but also trying to stay focused on the work of operating the organization and pursuing the improved outcomes for students that we're looking for. That's really all it's been about, just trying to make it manageable.
Krista?
Well, and I think in one way, having them go to John, maybe not necessarily John alone, but it points to themes, like where is it we need more education as a board? So some of the questions are about kind of understanding the history of why we provide support to students in a certain way. Some are about financials, some are about future trends. And I think it's helpful for us as a board to understand where our gaps in knowledge are and then figure out how to best address them. So I don't think at all, I'm not suggesting John should be a filter and deciding which questions go to Patrick and all, but I think it's just a good process point for us to think about, how we move forward with the greatest amount of understanding of what's happening. Getting on the same page with that. And then figure out who we need information from and who's the best person to give it to us.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So we have that action item, the additional questions. Just for clarity, shall we make a motion that the identified questions Patrick's written them down, I've circled them on the list, that those will be the additional questions for Patrick to get answers to?
So moved. Andrew.
Second.
Steve, second. All right. All those in favor of the identified additional questions for the superintendent, please give me a thumbs up or say aye. Okay, thumbs up all around. All right, it's passed. Okay,
On?
yes,
Sorry, who was the second on that?
Steve Rooney.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, next action is to re-engage the Community Engagement Committee. Would you like to talk about it first and then take action? Seems to be working, reducing the amount of amendments. Krista, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. So I wasn't sure we needed an action to meet again, but I do appreciate that there's value in us revisiting what our intentions are before the group gets together. And I think that the charge is good to revisit. You know, one thing I noted was that in the this guide to ownership linkage that some of us have gotten before, when I was looking at that, there was a sample policy around linking with owners. And I'm sorry, Dave, I know that ownership phrase is rankling, but I think we'll just use it for now to describe students, families, community members, taxpayers, you know, the many folks we know that are connected with our schools. We don't have a policy that relates in our board governance structure to that commitment to connect with our community. And so I think that's something that we should consider, along with making sure our charge for the committee is up to snuff, because then we don't really have a way, if there's no policy, to monitor if what we've done over the course of the year has achieved any goals that we set out. And so I think that's important to do. And I don't know, I'm sure there's a process that John could tell us about for how to do that. One thing I was wondering is if maybe John could share with everybody after this meeting the sample policy from that pamphlet that we could use as a template. And it also includes the sample charge. The charge that we have now, we drafted right after we unified, I believe. And it was when I think Caleb might have been the chair of the Community Engagement Committee. You know, the main intent was to really make sure we were connecting with community after we become a unified board and we're no longer, you know, 5 different boards or 6 boards representing our towns and Mount Abe. So there haven't been any updates to it since then. And, you know, I guess it makes sense to revisit whether it captures what we want this committee to be charged with doing. But whatever we do, to me, it's really important that we get our group together regardless. I don't want to not get together while we're wordsmithing a policy and a charge, because I think it's really important that we start the conversation again, you know, especially as we're going to start looking at proposals. We're going to talk with DMG, you know, to start having those conversations about what our engagement moving forward should look like. And, you know, something else that I found really valuable in this ownership linkage pamphlet, which I'm glad John reminded me of, you know, it was talking about end decisions. And I know, you know, I might be misusing the term ends in this. Oops, I lost my screen here. In this example, but I think, you know, we're looking forward at a really big decision. And so I think that hearing from our community and hearing from our stakeholders is really important. So I don't want us to get too hung up on limiting the dialogue we have. I think it should include as many of our community, including staff, as possible. And I don't think, you know, there's any reason why we shouldn't be able to provide an opportunity for folks to share their thinking on our plans moving forward, if they're involved at all with our district. So I guess I'm not sure what we need or want to do now, Don. But I know my main motivation is to send out a Google poll and at least get a meeting on the agenda to start thinking about how we want to engage.
Well, we've got some attention here. So Steve, let's start with you.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious, did the original charge expire? Do we need, and I thought we reorganized the committee last time, right? At our reorganization meeting?
Yep, we did. The charge doesn't, unless the work is completed, kind of thing, but it doesn't hurt to revisit it as it's been a while since it was created.
Sure, but I mean, are we actioning to reauthorize them? To reorganize the committee, or to reauthorize the committee?
Re-engage them, get them back meeting and working. I think was the intention of this. Just
okay. Well, I'll make the motion.
well, hang on. Let's hear from everybody, and then to avoid the amendment debacle. Kristen.
Yeah, we put people in the committee last time, and then the charge doesn't end until the committee isn't needed. So like you said, I think we can just go ahead and do that. And certainly, as Krista said, it's to get information again, which is sort of what the purpose of that committee has been. So,
Kevin. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
My question is, and I think I'm just echoing here. Do we need to do an action this charge in order for the committee to proceed? I have a concern with the charge as it's written now, that there's nothing that and Krista sort of alluded to it with this policy and the sample charge. Right now, the policy, there's nothing in there that drives to all inclusion of the community, if you will. And I think it's very important, if we're going to take a look again at the charge at this point, to have a topic or a statement in the charge to action the community engagement committee to consciously go out and identify components of the ownership and or stakeholders and drive to total involvement of the community. So that's basically my concern. I certainly don't want to hold up the community engagement committee from going forward, but as we look at this charge, I think we need to get that component into the charge.
Okay. So I think we can re-engage the community engagement committee, and then work maybe to represent the charge and add in a few more components that Krista and Kevin mentioned that in reading that book that Krista has looked at would be helpful, I think, for increasing our outreach and hearing from more people. So we can re-engage them or take action to re-engage them and go from there. Krista.
I was just wondering if we want to say at the next meeting, we come back with a refined charge and our sample policy. What's the procedure for the policy part?
So the policy, I'm going to have Patrick help me on this. It's got to be posted for a period of, is it 2 weeks or something like that?
Yeah, it's either 10 or 20 days. We usually do it when meetings are monthly. It's usually posted one meeting and then adopted in the following.
Right.
So it's approved for posting, then it's posted for the required amount of time and then some, and then ready for action at the following month's board meeting.
Right.
And in terms of policy development, there's a process that leads up to posting. I don't know if that's the process that you're talking about, Krista.
Yeah.
Write the policy first.
So,
Yeah, it's the development part that I was wondering about.
so that would probably take bringing a proposal or bringing some language and then having a review and going from that. Is that the way you remember it, Patrick?
Yeah, my recollection is it's historically been around non-compliance when we can't be compliant with a policy. I'm thinking about we had a policy that spoke to not having any contracts that extended beyond 1 year, which when you're talking about transportation contracts and other things like that. So the process was in response to reporting non-compliance on a policy. Part of the process for becoming compliant was recommending a policy language change. And then that change would be recommended at a subsequent meeting, be kind of kicked around and land on what the language change would be, which then positions that language change to be posted at the next meeting and then adopted at the following meeting.
But that process and getting a policy in place over that wouldn't stop this group from beginning their work and taking off, and we could still work on the charge to give direction.
Absence of policy doesn't usually stop anything from happening.
Right. So I guess, Steve, if you want to re-engage him, go for it. Make your motion.
Sorry, I was looking for something and I got zoomed out here. So, yeah, I'll make a motion to re-engage them.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, Kristen. All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor of re-engaging the Community Engagement Committee, please give me a thumbs up. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs everywhere. So that one passes. All right. Next is an update, the VSB legislative update. Dave, you want to take this?
Sure. So everyone should have gotten from Dawn a message from the VSBA that by this evening. So I believe the Senate is going to vote tomorrow, the Senate committee, to pass universal meals for all students in the state of Vermont on the local budget, to be paid for by the local budget. So the VSBA's position is that universal meals is a great idea. It should be paid for by some other means besides another piece of the property tax. And they're asking all of us to contact our senators and representatives to that effect. You know, fine, just don't do another unfunded mandate. Pay for it if you think it's such a great idea. So that's the most timely thing that I have to report. Other things is the other really big money thing that's ongoing is pensions, paying for pensions. And there's a lot of work being done. There are competing interests. Everybody wants good pensions. Nobody wants to pay for it type of deal. And I have expressed my opinion, and I encourage you to express your opinion to our representatives and state leaders. Some other things that are going through, and I'll just do quickly. There's H106, which is the support of community schools. It's a 3-year experiment. grant funded. There's 1.53 million in that bill. It's not passed, and it's iffy if it's going to pass, but it's out there. H91 to suspend the finance system. So this is likely to pass, and this affects you, Floyd, more than anyone else. But it's likely to pass that they will suspend the implementation of the finance system. That could make matters even messier for you, Floyd, as you try to, create books that are auditable and pass muster with the Department of Education. But that bill,
I'll push that back to you and the whole board. The reality is that your fiduciary responsibility
is to have an auditable financials. And with the current mandated software, we can't run a bank reconciliation. And if you think of it in terms of simplistic, it's balancing your checkbook, and the software that has been mandated cannot do that.
right, and you're not the only one that's complained about this. This has been widespread objections across the state, which is why this bill is likely to pass to suspend. But what's going to be in its place? And my understanding is that many districts, and I think you said this earlier, Floyd, essentially running two sets of books.
We budgeted to continue the current accounting software, which will be
auditable, and you will be able to sign off on that as the board. That is in next year's budget, regardless of the current mandated structure. We've worked to be able to have a crosswalk if that's necessary. I think it's important that the board recognize that that the public is going to see us with the state's required software that doesn't work, and we're going to ask our taxpayers to pay for this one as well, because we can, with the software that's proposed for us to take, you have the ability to write a check and then go back into the system at the end and change the name to who the check was written to, and there's no trail to be able to find that. It's a recipe for just nothing but problems.
Yeah.
So I just think it's important that you as a board recognize that going forward, we've allocated money to pay for two software systems to protect our taxpayers.
So board members, if you're inclined, the number is H91. If you're so inclined, send a note to Caleb Elder, Mari Cordes, Harvey Smith, Senator Chris Bray, and Senator Ruth Hardy, outlining what Floyd just told us.
And I'm happy to provide the letter Patrick and I sent today. If you would, just send me a note saying, forward it to me. I'm not going to fill your inboxes, but if you would like,
forward it right over.
Unless there's an objection from a board member, I would suggest that you send it to all board members.
Suggested, accepted.
More on this? Is that what you have, Kevin? Is more on this question?
I guess I have a question about letter writing. We can't, as board members, write and represent board position because there hasn't been one taken. So do we write these emails as individuals and allude to the fact we're on boards as opposed to influencing our board position? I'm not really clear on what the proper way to do that is.
I was suggesting that you do it as individual citizens. If you're making a motion to do that as a board, then I don't know, I'll leave that up to the chair's decision.
So Kevin, which way are you leaning towards? Because
I'm not necessarily asking to make a motion. I'm just trying to differentiate. A lot of times the VSBA will come out and say, get your boards to write letters. And if we're writing them as individual citizens, is that as impactful as a representative to a board from Bristol? And exactly, can you say that without stating a board position? I mean, there's a fine line here.
So years ago, what happened was the board would say, yes, we want to have a say in that. And the representative, who was our VSBA representative, would send a message, the board's message, from, as you know, that there as our contact. So, but that was some time ago. And then,
well, I would say that the VSBA is our lobbying arm in the legislature, and they are advocating for the passage of 891 to H91 to suspend the finance system that does not work. And I, as a former legislator, I have to say I took personal messages from citizens more seriously than I did a note from an organization.
okay. So as individual community members, it sounds like that's the way to go.
Okay, so moving on, S100 is a universal meals program. It's estimated to cost between 24 and 40 million, and that's moving forward on our dime. There are two bills, one in the Senate, S114, and one in the House, 101, on literacy. The new funding out of the federal government looks like it's going to pay for that. And so you'll see an initiative out of the State Board of Education around literacy. The weighting study is likely to be put into a study committee or a task force, which means that it's unlikely to move forward this year, but maybe more likely to move forward next year if this task force was able to come to some sort of consensus about the right way to move forward. And then H81, which the state board is lobbying against, creates some changes in the healthcare bargaining process that and I'm not well versed in this. I didn't read the bill or the latest versions, but their estimation, it hurts school boards' ability to contain healthcare costs. So they are lobbying against H81, and that's really all I have. Sorry to take up so much time, but the legislature is moving rather rapidly towards closing, and so any communication you have as individuals to your legislators it's important to get on the ball and write some notes. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, the next item was to review a form for requesting agenda items. Just to keep it short and sweet, because we're at 9:25 right now. If you have any feedback on that, let me know. It is the sample form that I shared with members back at the retreat. It's now in a poll form. Jennifer was able to take it and put it on so that if we use this, when it's filled out, it goes directly to the board chair, and then that starts the process. This was a result of the monitoring report that Sarah McLean did, and her recommendation around partial compliance was to have some way for board members to be more of a part of the agenda planning part of it. Steve?
So I just spent the last half hour trying to find how we make a policy on a drive. And I thought this is kind of germane to what you just stated. I'm wondering if we can fit 10 minutes into a future agenda to tour the drive and just show people how it works, where things are, how it's organized or how it's not organized. And maybe we develop some plans to improve it.
Right, Krista.
This form looks great, and I was wondering, could we include a link to it on every agenda?
I certainly, I think we could, or we could have a place. I guess we could put it at the top or have a place.
I'm just thinking like this is, his point, it could get buried and lost, but it's a really helpful tool. So, you know, it might be something that would be used more often or.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of my point, is that the drive is an easy place to lose things right now. And I think a lot of people are unaware of how to even get around in it. And if it was well organized, we wouldn't necessarily lose things.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to have to go back and look at the actual monitoring report on where this tied in to see if there were any recommendations of language changes to the policy. So send your comments, because we may have to revisit the policy. So that will be at a future regular meeting. And but send your comments to this to me, and we'll go from there. Okay. All right. And the next item is a sample self-appraisal for individual board members. And I took the liberty of working on this because I thought it might be helpful to some of the questions I get in emails, or some of the board members wondering, like, are they doing what they could be doing at a meeting? And it would be a tool you use for yourself. You look at it, and then, you know, if you see a spot where you're struggling, you can reach out for help, or, you know, if enough of us need help, then it can be a place for board education, or again, just review it, send your feedback, or, you know, whether you think it's useful or not. Okay. All right. Don't think we are in need of an executive session. Okay. Is there any public comment?
Don?
I see her, Don.
Oh,
I've
lost
given
you, Herb. Where'd you go?
the digital hand.
There you are.
So I sent everybody a note last week about, you know, trying to develop some sort of planning tool around staffing and finances. And, you know, I was kind of thinking it might come up this meeting. Rob, I appreciate, you know, you mentioned of that. But I guess it's not something within the board's purview. So my comment, I guess, is directed at Floyd and Patrick. You know, I'm encouraged that you are trying to do this, some type of tool. I think it would be really, really helpful, both for you guys, you know, in terms of trying to get some boundaries around this whole thing. I think it'd be really helpful for folks who are trying to put together a proposal. Really, it'd be very helpful, I would think, from the board's perspective when it comes down to you're trying to evaluate different proposals and trying to compare them on an apples to apples basis. The key, however, is going to be having as robust a database as possible. You know, you've been flooded with, you know, questions from community members. The more you can develop a robust database, I think it'll be really, really helpful. It probably will answer a lot of the questions that are being posed, and it will spare you the the time and effort of having to, sort of backfill on stuff that people maybe really kind of need to know, either, the people are trying to develop proposals or community members at the end of the day. If you can get all that stuff out there in terms of data points, in terms of the baseline to begin with, I think you'd be doing everyone a big service. I'm not saying that you're not. I don't know what you're developing, so I encourage you to do that, and I appreciate your efforts in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Herb. Herb, you might, the message has gone out today, and the tool that Patrick and Floyd have been working on has been set out. If I'm pretty sure that went out. I think I saw that. So that's out there. And I think, I know we didn't discuss your particular tool tonight, but it may come up in the course of our conversation with Nate when we talk to Nate from DMG. So
yeah. I appreciate that, Don. And no, I haven't checked the email while you folks have been meeting. But I think DMG isn't going to be, that's the middle of April. And proposals are due, the first week of May. So time's running out, as it always does. Thank you.
Thank you. And then
I might just add, Don, I know Floyd can elaborate on this a little bit, but Floyd, I know, has reviewed the information that Herb sent carefully and tried to weave a lot of the thinking there into the tool that was being developed. So it'll be worth taking a look at that, Herb, and just seeing where it hits the mark, and knowing there are many layers, we can continue to peel back layers as more information is needed. But hopefully it's a good starting point is what we're going for.
Okay, I appreciate that, Patrick.
Paul Forenza.
Hi, Paul Forenza, Lincoln Select Board. The engagement committee, I'm delighted that that's being reenacted. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that maybe the committee could work on is getting an apples to apples on cost per student. So one of the things I heard Patrick say tonight led me to believe that the $28,000 per student in Lincoln probably needs to be reworked. And I think a lot of that has to do around where you put the bond amount. I mean, the school is a district asset. So if it's a district asset, then that cost needs to be distributed. If you're going to compare students, cost per student. So I just encourage the committee to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other virtual hands. Look at one more screen. Okay. All right. Chris, do you have the meeting evaluation up?
You bet.
Great.
All right. What is the level of engagement of all board members, high or low?
I'm high.
For high?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm seeing thumbs up. Hi.
All right. Was the agenda followed? Yes or no?
Yes. Thumbs up.
Okay. Any comments?
Well, I do appreciate that, even though it got a little off topic, that board members were willing to speak up and help get us back on track. I appreciate, because it doesn't always have to be only my job.
Does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board? Yes or no?
Thumbs up. Thumbs up.
Any comments?
Yep. Thumbs up.
Comments?
Any comments?
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of the board process? Yes or no?
Thumbs up.
Any comments?
Nope.
Other feedback for the chair? Moving on. What went well with the meeting?
We slogged through that list of questions.
What suggestions do you have for ways to improve future meetings? Although I think you guys kind of covered this during the meeting. Anything?
I think making sure that we have like some kind of time thing like Kristen suggested so we can
timekeeper.
Yeah, just to move us at times. Not that it's not good conversation, but we have really long board meetings and they could be much shorter.
All right, that's a wrap.
Okay. All right. How about a motion to adjourn at 9:37?
Moved, Andrew.
Second, Steve.
Andrew and Steve. All those in favor, give a thumbs up. Okay, that's thumbs up. Anybody opposed? Any abstention? All right, it passed. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.